People like you enter through service doors, Dr. Preston Vale said, loud enough for 18 doctors to hear, while my hand stayed in the air between us. Then he looked at my navy suit, my visitor badge, and the audit order in my folder, and called me the cleaning lady. 3 days later, he would reach for that same hand in the same room. By then, his $420,000 problem would be sitting on the table. By then, the gray cabinet behind Maribel Henson's desk would be open. By then, the brass EC pen in my purse would mean more than he could stand. And when Maribel read the sentence with my full name in it, Dr. Preston Vale would stop smiling before she reached the word, "Let me take you back." Mercy Vale Hospital sat on Hawthorne Mill Road, 30 minutes outside Toledo, with polished glass doors and a lobby that always looked freshly wiped. Briar Glen was that kind of town, small enough that people knew which doctors golfed together, big enough for those same doctors to call it networking instead of protection. I was 24 years old that Tuesday morning. My name was Lena Carver. I wore a pressed navy suit, low heels, and my braids pinned neat at the back of my head. My grandmother used to say neatness could enter a room before anger did. So I entered neat. The main conference room was on the 3rd floor, past cardiology, past administration, past a row of framed donor photos. There were 18 doctors seated around the long table. I counted them before I spoke. Counting was a habit. Faces, folders, dates, missing pages, numbers that tried to pretend they belonged. Dr. Preston Vale stood at the far end with both hands on the chair back. He was in his late 50s, tall, silver at the temples, with that hospital chief smile people practice in charity brochures. He had a blue tie, a gold watch, and the kind of tan Ohio men get when their workday includes golf. "Dr. Vale," I said. "Lena Carver, Independent Audit Review." I held out my hand. He let it hang there, not for 1 second, not 2, long enough for the room to understand what he was doing. Then he said, "People like you enter through service doors." A few doctors looked down. One coughed into his fist. A woman near the window shifted her coffee cup 2 inches, like porcelain needed saving. I kept my hand still. Dr. Vale smiled wider. "Did housekeeping start wearing suits now?" 2 men laughed. 3 more tried not to. One did that tight little nose sound people make when they want credit for restraint. He looked at my badge. "Cleaning staff checks in downstairs, Miss Carver." "I'm here for the inspection," I said. "You're here because somebody in Columbus got nervous over paperwork." "Then I'll start with the paperwork." He leaned forward. "You'll start where I tell you to start." That was the first line I read on him, not the one in the ledger, the one in the man. He needed the room to see him over me. He needed that more than he needed the truth. Men like Preston Vale don't just enjoy power. They panic when it has to share a table. I lowered my hand. Slowly. No flourish. No speech. I had learned early that silence made certain people fill the air with evidence. From the side wall, Maribel Henson watched me. She was the board secretary and records custodian. 60, maybe 62. Short gray hair, dark green cardigan, reading glasses on a chain. She had the still face of a woman who had heard too much and saved all of it in the right drawer. I had met her once by phone. 5 minutes. She had said, "Bring the audit order in blue ink." That was all. So I opened my folder and took out the order. I uncapped my fountain pen. Brass barrel, black grip. 2 small letters engraved near the clip. E.C. Maribel saw it. Her face changed for half a second. Not much. Just the tiny stop of her breath. The kind people miss when they're busy laughing. I signed on the first line. Preston glanced at the pen. "That's dramatic." "It writes clean," I said. "I'm sure it does." "I don't raise my voice," I said. I read the line. The room went quiet. Not humbled, not yet. Just unsure. Preston looked around at his doctors, then back at me. Well, read fast. We have patience. That was rich, coming from him. Shame had a way of wearing a white coat in that building. Maribel stepped forward and took the signed order. Her fingers brushed the pen for a moment. She looked at the initials again. Ms. Carver, she said, I'll log this at 10:14 a.m. Thank you, Ms. Henson. Preston's smile thinned. Maribel, don't overdo the ceremony. It's an audit, not a coronation. She did not answer him, but her eyes moved once toward the back of the administration suite, toward a locked gray cabinet behind her desk. I noticed everything. That was why I was there. I did not audit hospitals by chasing rumors. I matched supply invoices to operating room schedules. I matched payroll batches to staffing rosters. I matched charity disbursements to patient accounts. Dates told the truth when people got tired, and Mercy Vale had too many tired dates. A $17,800 orthopedic supply invoice on February 11th. Operating Room 3 had been closed that day for ceiling repair. A $9,460 anesthesia equipment charge from a vendor that had not delivered anything in 7 months. 3 charity clinic transfers, $28,000, $31,500, and $19,250, all routed through Preston's private management company before landing back in hospital operations. Money can walk in circles, but it still leaves footprints. I had found the first circle 2 weeks before, sitting at my desk in Columbus with cold tea beside my keyboard. Mercy Vale's public filings had been clean enough at the top. Too clean. The kind of clean that tells an auditor somebody wiped the counters but forgot under the stove. So I asked for direct access. The board approved a 3-day inspection. Preston Vale sent me a 1-line email. Bring identification and stay out of clinical areas. No greeting, no signature beyond his title. I printed it and put it in my folder. My grandmother, Eleanor Carver, had worked 31 years as a night nurse at Mercy Vale. She had walked these halls when the old South Wing still smelled like floor wax and boiled coffee. She had worked holidays, double shifts, and winter storms that shut down Route 20. She had retired with a brass name badge, a sore left knee, and a pension that did not match what she had given. She died before I became an auditor. Not in that hospital. I was grateful for that. Still, when I passed the donor wall that morning, I looked for her name. It was not there. Of course it wasn't. Mercy Vale had a way of using people up without learning how to spell them. Preston clapped once. All right, Tor, since we're performing transparency. He said it like the word tasted cheap. A doctor with red-framed glasses asked, Do we all need to stay? Preston said, No, Dr. Wilkes, unless you want to watch Miss Carver count mop buckets. There it was again, cleaning lady, mop buckets, service doors. He did not use a slur. He did not have to. He placed me where he believed my deep brown skin belonged, then invited the room to agree by laughing. Some did. Some did worse. They stayed silent. I wrote their names in my head. Dr. Samuel Wilkes, red glasses, laughed through his nose. Dr. Brian Tuttle, orthopedic chair, stared at his phone. Dr. Karen Bell, surgery, folded her arms and looked at the table. Dr. Marcus Reed, emergency medicine, did not laugh. He looked at me once, then away. That look mattered too. Cowardice can be quiet and still be loud. Preston led the way out of the conference room. I walked beside Maribel for 6 steps before he turned around. Maribel, no need to babysit. She needs records access, Maribel said. She needs a hallway and a clipboard. She has board authorization. His jaw moved. There it was, the small crack. Fine, he said. But keep it efficient. I always do, she said. I liked her then, not because she was kind. Kind is nice. Useful is better when a door is locked. We started at the loading dock. Mercy Vale's loading dock sat behind the west wing, facing a cracked strip of asphalt and a row of dented dumpsters. The July heat had already climbed into the concrete. A delivery truck idled near the ramp. Two men in gray uniforms rolled boxes toward the double doors. A security guard named Cal Porter checked his phone under the shade. Preston pointed around like he was showing art. Supplies arrive here. They're scanned, stored, distributed. Nothing mysterious. Who scans them? I asked. Receiving. Name? He sighed. Depends on the shift. I looked at the clipboard hanging by the door. Today it's Dennis Hale. Preston glanced at it, annoyed I could read. Dennis Hale came out with a handheld scanner clipped to his belt. Maybe 40? Work boots? Sweat on his collar. Morning, he said. Mr. Hale, I said. I'm checking February entries. Orthopedic supply delivery from North Star Medical. Invoice ending 7714. Amount was $17,800. Dennis blinked. February? February 11th. He scratched his cheek. OR3 was down around then. Yes. Preston cut in. Operating room repair does not stop supplies from arriving. No, I said, but the invoice says used on arrival. Dennis looked at Preston. Preston looked at Dennis. That little triangle said plenty. I turned a page. Can you show me the receiving scan? Dennis swallowed. If it came through here. If? Some executive orders bypass receiving. Preston said, that's not how I'd phrase it. Dennis went quiet. I wrote 3 words on my pad. Bypass receiving. Preston saw me write them. His voice dropped. Ms. Carver, be careful about implying misconduct in front of hourly staff. I asked for a scan. You asked in a tone. I asked in English. Maribel made a small sound behind me. Not a laugh. Almost. Preston heard it anyway. He stepped closer. This hospital serves 46,000 patient visits a year. We do not have time for theater. Then the scan should save us time. Dennis shifted his weight. I can pull the log. Thank you, I said. Preston's phone buzzed. He looked down, and for the first time that morning, his confidence twitched. Only a twitch, but money fear has a smell. It is sharp. Clean suits don't cover it. He turned away and answered. Vale. I kept my eyes on Dennis. Has North Star delivered this month? Not this month. Last month? Maybe once. Do you remember what? He glanced at Preston's back. Gloves, maybe, some tubing. Not orthopedic hardware? No, ma'am. Ma'am, Preston called me cleaning staff. Dennis called me ma'am. People tell you who raised them in small words. Maribel said, the receiving terminal is inside. I'd like copies, I said. I'll print them. Preston ended his call. No copies leave this building without my approval. Maribel looked at him. The board order says audit materials may be duplicated. The board does not run daily operations. No, I said, but it can review them. He turned to me slowly. The doctors were gone. The loading dock men had stopped pretending not to listen. Cal Porter still held his phone, but his thumb had quit moving. Preston smiled again, smaller now. Ms. Carver, you are young, so I'll give you advice. Hospitals are not spreadsheets. There are relationships here, donors, vendors, families. If you tug at every thread, patients suffer. I'm looking at one invoice. You're looking for a headline. I'm looking for the line. He stared at me. I held the stare. No anger, not outside. Inside, I thought about my grandmother's left knee. I thought about her coming home at 7:30 in the morning, smelling like antiseptic and peppermint gum. I thought about her sitting at our kitchen table with a pencil behind her ear, paying bills before she slept. I thought about the brass name badge she kept in a white jewelry box, wrapped in tissue like it had been gold. Eleanor Carver, RN night shift. She had never called Mercy Vale hers, but she had watched it like it owed her something. Maybe it did. Preston looked away first. "Pharmacy cage," he said. The pharmacy cage was not a cage exactly. It was a locked room with wire-reinforced glass, 2 badge readers, and a camera in each corner. Inside, shelves held medication bins, controlled inventory logs, and refrigerator units with digital temperature displays. A pharmacy manager named Ellen Price met us there. She wore blue scrubs and a tired bun. She shook my hand before Preston could stop her. "Ellen," he said, "Ms. Carver is reviewing supply chain. Keep it narrow." "I'll answer what she asks," Ellen said. Good. Another name in my head. I asked for disposal logs, then emergency purchase orders, then charity clinic medication transfers for March and April. Preston's foot started tapping. Not fast, just enough. At 11:26 a.m., Ellen handed me a printed sheet. Charity Wing insulin support, March 4th, March 18th, April 2nd. I read the columns. March 18th shows $12,300 moved from restricted charity inventory to general inpatient pharmacy. Ellen's mouth tightened. That was an executive request. Preston said, "Temporary internal flexibility." I looked up. "Restricted funds are flexible here?" He smiled with no warmth. "Within reason." Maribel stopped writing, just stopped. Her pen hovered over her notebook. I repeated his words in my head. "Restricted funds are flexible here. Some sentences arrive already wearing handcuffs." I said, "Who approved it?" "I did," Preston said. "For which patient account?" "We don't discuss patient details in hallways. We're not in a hallway." Ellen looked at the floor. Maribel's pen touched paper again. Preston leaned in close enough that I could smell mint on his breath. "You are making enemies you don't understand." "I understand dates. Dates don't run hospitals." "No," I said, "but they remember who did." He pulled back. For one clean second, he looked less like a chief and more like a man standing beside a locked drawer. Then the face returned. "Charity Wing," he said. We walked past pediatrics, past imaging, past a chapel alcove with 6 chairs and a small wooden cross on the wall. I slowed there without meaning to. My grandmother's church was 3 miles away on Juniper Street, New Mount Zion Baptist. She had sung alto there for 40 years, not loud, steady. The kind of voice that held the middle while other people reached for glory. When I was little, she brought peppermints in her purse and let me draw on offering envelopes after service. She wore her nurse shoes to church if she had worked the night before. White leather, soft creases, always clean. I wondered how many Sunday mornings she had prayed for Mercy Vale after leaving it. Then I kept walking. The charity wing had newer paint than the rest of the hospital. Pale blue, framed photos of smiling donors. A plaque near the entrance said Mercy Access Clinic, serving Briar Glen families since 1988. A mother sat in the waiting area with a sleeping toddler against her chest. An older man in a work shirt filled out forms with a borrowed pen. A teenager with a bandaged wrist watched a muted television. This was where restricted money was supposed to land. Not in Preston's management company, not in a payroll float, not in some private rescue boat with his name painted on the side. A clinic coordinator named Grace Morton opened the file room for us. She was careful with her eyes. She knew Preston was listening. I asked for March patient assistance records. Preston said, "No patient names." "Redacted is fine." Grace printed summaries. Her hands moved quickly. March 4th, $28,000 allocated. $16,200 applied. March 18th, $31,500 allocated. $7,840 applied. April 2nd, $19,250 allocated. $4,100 applied. The rest had been transferred out. I circled the balances. Preston watched my pen. "You enjoy this?" he asked. "No. You could have fooled me. I enjoy clean records. Records are never clean in real life. They are when people respect them." His eyes hardened. There was the word, respect. People like him loved that word when it flowed upward, from nurses to chiefs, from clerks to boards, from women at conference room doors to men who refused their hands. But respect going downward? That confused them. At 12:08, Preston ended the tour. Not because I was done, because he was. We were near the elevators when he took my temporary badge between two fingers and looked at it like it had stained him. "This access is revoked." Maribel stepped forward. "Dr. Vale, the order authorizes 3 days. I'm chief of this hospital. And the board authorized 3 days." He turned to Cal Porter, who had followed us from the dock after Preston texted him. "Escort Miss Carver out." Cal looked at me. He was not smiling now. "Sir," he said, "she's with the board secretary." "She's with herself," Preston snapped. "And she's done." Maribel's voice stayed flat. "I'll note this. You note whatever helps you sleep." Then he looked at me. In front of 2 nurses, a billing clerk, Grace Morton, Ellen Price, Dennis Hale, Cal Porter, and Maribel Henson, he lifted my badge and said, "The cleaning lady can leave through the back." Nobody moved, nobody spoke. The toddler in the charity waiting area slept through it. That was mercy, at least. I took the badge from his hand. I did not snatch it. I did not let my fingers touch his. "Please spell that for the record," I said. His brow creased. "Spell what?" "Cleaning lady." His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Maribel looked down at her notebook. I said, "If you want it in the audit obstruction note, I want it accurate." Cal coughed once. Preston's face flushed from the neck up. "You think you're clever." "No," I said. "I think I'm working." "Get her out." Cal did not touch me. He walked beside me through the back corridor, past linen carts, past an employee bulletin board, past a vending machine with 3 empty rows. At the service exit, he pushed the door open. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. I looked at him. "For what you did or what you watched?" He swallowed. That answer was enough. Outside, the loading dock heat hit my face. My rental car sat in the visitor lot on the far side of the building. Preston had made sure I had to walk the long way. Fine. I had good shoes. I crossed the asphalt with my folder under my arm and my brass pen in my purse. The sun bounced off the hospital glass. For a moment, Mercy Vale looked clean enough to trust. That was the trick. At my car, I opened the folder and checked the audit order. Signed, time-stamped, witnessed by Maribel Henson at 10:14 a.m. Then I checked my notes. North Star invoice, $17,800. Charity transfer, $31,500. Restricted funds are flexible here. Cleaning lady. I wrote the last phrase by itself. Cleaning lady. Then I underlined it once, not because it hurt the most, because men like Preston always think the insult is the weapon. It isn't. The record is. My motel was the Briar Glen Motor Lodge, 2 miles down Hawthorne Mill Road, across from a closed carpet store and a diner that served breakfast all day. Room 12 had a humming air conditioner, a brown bedspread, and a desk with one short leg. I folded a takeout napkin under it and set up my laptop. At 1:34 p.m., I started pulling public filings. At 2:10, I found Preston Vale Management, LLC, listed on 3 vendor remittance forms. At 2:48, I found the same LLC on a payroll support memo marked Temporary Liquidity Assistance. At 3:17, I found a board packet from 8 months earlier. It mentioned a restricted charity reserve of $420,000. At 3:19, I stopped typing. I read it again. $420,000. That was not a rounding error. That was not a messy transfer. That was a locked box with somebody's hand inside. My phone buzzed at 3:22. Unknown number. I answered. Lena Carver. Maribel Henson said, "Are you alone?" "Yes." "Is this line secure?" "As secure as a motel phone call gets. Use your cell only. Don't call from the room phone." "I am." She breathed out. I waited. People tell more truth when you don't rush to help them lie. Finally, she said, "Dr. Vale has called an executive committee update for tomorrow morning." "About the audit?" "About your removal." "He can call it what he wants. He intends to say you were disruptive." I figured. He also asked me to prepare a statement that no ownership authority supports your inspection. I looked at the brass pen beside my laptop. EC. My grandmother's initials caught the motel light. "What did you say?" I asked. "I said I would review the vault." There was that word, vault, not cabinet, not file drawer, vault. I sat back slowly. "The gray cabinet behind your desk," I said. Silence. Then Maribel said, "You noticed." "Yes." "I thought you might." "What's in it?" She did not answer right away. Outside my window, a pickup rolled into the motel lot. Its brakes squealed. A man laughed near the ice machine. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary day. Inside my room, the air changed. Maribel said, "There are sealed board files." "Ownership?" "Yes." "My grandmother's name is in one of them." Another silence. Longer. "Ms. Carver," she said softly, "where did you get that pen?" I touched the brass barrel. Eleanor Carver was my grandmother. I know who she was. The way Maribel said it made my chest tighten. Not pity, not surprise, recognition. "She worked nights," I said. "She did more than that." I looked at the closed motel door. "What does that mean?" "I can't read sealed contents over the phone." "Then tell me what you can tell me." A page turned on her end. Maybe a notebook. Maybe a memory. "Your grandmother came to board meetings after retirement," Maribel said. "Not often. Always quiet. Always with records. She bought distressed shares when old physician families sold them off. Small lots at first. $2,000. $5,000. Once $12,000 after a bad winter." My fingers went still. She never told me. She told almost no one. "How many shares?" "I can't say on the phone." "Maribel." "I can't," she said. "Not yet. Not yet." Those two words opened a door and kept me outside it. I looked at the audit packet on my desk. Preston's signature was missing from half the documents. His company sat between charity funds and hospital bills. His mouth had called me cleaning staff because his books needed me small. And my grandmother, dead and still ahead of him, had left something in a locked gray cabinet. I said, "What do you need from me?" "Keep working. Pull every public filing you can. Don't come back through the service entrance." "I wasn't planning to." "Good." Then she lowered her voice. "There is a condition in the sealed file." "What kind of condition?" "One tied to charity funds." The room went very still. My laptop fan hummed. I said, "Restricted charity funds?" "Yes." Preston said those were flexible. I wrote that down. So did I. Maribel took one careful breath. "Ms. Carver, if he used restricted money to rescue his private company, your grandmother prepared for that." I closed my eyes. Not to cry. I didn't cry. I needed 1 second to see Eleanor Carver at our kitchen table. Pencil behind her ear. Nurse shoes under the chair. Brass name badge near her hand. 31 years of night shifts, and she had been buying pieces of the place that would not promote her. Quietly, legally, line by line. "When can the file be opened?" I asked. Only at an emergency board review or by court order. Then request the review. I can't request it alone. I can. You'll need grounds. I looked at my notes. $17,800, $31,500, $420,000. I have grounds. You'll need witnesses. I have 18 doctors who watched him refuse my hand. That's not financial grounds. No, I said. That's character. Maribel was quiet. Then she said, "Character is not nothing." "No, ma'am. It's usually where the money starts leaking." For the first time, she gave a small laugh. It lasted less than a second. Then she was records custodian again. "Send me your preliminary findings by 6 p.m. Use my personal email. I'll send the bylaw section after that." "Maribel?" "Yes." "Why are you helping me?" Another pause. This one had age in it. "Because Eleanor Carver once stayed 4 hours after a night shift to sit with my husband when I was stuck in a snowstorm outside Perrysburg," she said. "And because Dr. Vale thinks records are furniture." "They're not." "No," she said. "They're doors." The call ended. I sat there with the phone in my hand. Then I opened a new document. Preliminary audit findings, Mercy Vale Hospital. I typed the date. July 14th. Briar Glen, Ohio. I listed every item in order. 1. North Star Medical Invoice, $17,800, February 11th, tied to Operating Room 3 closure. 2. Charity Insulin Transfer, $12,300, March 18th, Executive Request. 3. Restricted Clinic Allocation, $31,500, same date, only $7,840 applied to patient accounts. 4. Preston Vale Management, LLC, listed on vendor remittance and payroll support forms. 5. Restricted Charity Reserve, $420,000, referenced in board packet. 6. Audit Obstruction, badge revoked at 12:08 p.m. 7. Verbal statement by Dr. Preston Vale. I stopped at 7. Then I typed it exactly. The cleaning lady can leave through the back. I did not dress it up. Ugly words should not get a clean coat before they enter the record. At 5:56, I sent the file to Maribel. At 6:03, she sent me one page from the hospital bylaws. Section 9.4, Emergency Ownership Review. I read it twice, then a third time. A sealed ownership file could be opened if a chief officer was credibly alleged to have used restricted hospital funds for private financial rescue. Private financial rescue. That phrase had Preston's fingerprints all over it. At 6:17, Maribel sent one more message. No greeting, no explanation, just 9 words. "Do you still have Eleanor's brass name badge?" I stared at the screen. Then I got up and opened my suitcase. Under my folded blouse, under my spare flats, inside a small zip pocket, was a white cloth pouch. I had carried it since my grandmother's funeral because I did not like leaving it in an apartment drawer. Inside was her badge. Brass, worn at the edges, her name engraved in block letters. Eleanor Carver, RN. I held it in my palm. It was heavier than it looked. My phone buzzed again. Maribel. "Bring it tomorrow," she said. "Do not show Preston." I put the phone down and stood there with my suitcase open. The white cloth pouch sat in my palm. My grandmother had stitched that pouch herself from an old handkerchief. One corner still had a small blue E. I used to think it was sweet. A nurse saving her own name in thread. Now I wondered if she had been saving evidence. I laid the badge beside the brass pen. Eleanor Carver, RN, EC beside EC. 2 pieces of a woman Mercy Vale had underestimated because she worked nights, wore sensible shoes, and never asked permission twice. My mother used to say, "Your grandmother could make a man apologize without changing her face." I had thought that meant church manners. That night, I learned it might have meant strategy. At 6:38, my phone rang again. This time, the number was listed. Mercy Vale Hospital. I answered, Lena Carver. Preston Vale said, "You've been busy." I looked at the motel curtains. They were thin enough to show the parking lot lights. "I'm working," I said. "No," he said. "You're trespassing on institutional matters." "Then stop calling me." He gave one dry laugh. "You don't understand the size of this room." "I understand numbers. You understand invoices. That's not leadership." "No," I said. "It's usually what leadership is hiding." He went quiet. There it was again. That little pause men leave when they need to decide if a woman is lucky or dangerous. With me, he had chosen wrong twice already. He said, "You embarrassed yourself today." "Did I?" "In front of staff." "You mean witnesses. You think they'll stand with you?" "I think they'll remember." His voice lowered. Briar Glen is a small town. I noticed. Then notice this. I know every doctor on that board. I know every lawyer who files in Lucas County. I know every donor whose name is on those walls. And still you called me. You need to leave this alone. Why? Because you're out of your depth. I looked at my grandmother's badge. The brass had a scratch near the R in Carver. I rubbed it with my thumb. "Doctor," I said, "I was born in deep water." He breathed through his nose. "You're very proud," he said. "No, I'm precise." "Tomorrow morning," he said, "the executive committee will hear my report. You won't be allowed inside." "Then why tell me?" "So you can make a grown decision." "You mean a quiet one." "I mean a smart one." I sat down at the desk. The short leg rocked once against the napkin. "Is Preston Vale Management LLC smart?" I asked. Silence. I kept my voice even. "Is the $12,300 insulin transfer smart? Is the $420,000 reserve smart? Or is that just flexible?" He did not speak for 4 full seconds. Then he said, "Who gave you that number?" "Public record gave me part. Your arrogance gave me the rest." "You have no standing." "You keep saying that." "Because it's true." "Then sleep well." "Ms. Carver." "Yes." "If you walk back into my hospital tomorrow, I'll have you removed." I closed my laptop. "You already did that today, and I'll do it with more witnesses." "Good," I said. "Use the front lobby." He hung up first. I did not smile. I wrote the time on my legal pad. 6:42 p.m. Preston Vale call. Threatened removal, denied standing, reacted to LLC and reserve. Then I wrote one more word. Flexible. That word was going to cost him. I did not eat until after 9. The diner across from the motel was called Millie's, though the woman at the register said Millie had sold it 12 years ago and moved to Arizona. I sat in a booth near the window with a plate of eggs, toast, and potatoes I barely touched. 2 men in Mercy Vale polo shirts sat 3 booths behind me. I knew one from the loading dock, Dennis Hale. The other was younger, with a shaved head and a hospital maintenance badge clipped to his belt. They did not see me at first. Dennis said, "He was hot today." The younger man said, "Vale? Who else? She really an auditor?" Looked like one to me. Cal said she had papers. Dennis lowered his voice. She had more than papers. I held my fork still. The younger man said, "Like what?" "I don't know, but Price from pharmacy looked sick after." "Everybody looks sick around Price." "No, different sick." The waitress came with coffee. I put one finger over my cup. "No, thank you," I said. Dennis heard my voice and turned. His face changed. Not guilt. Calculation. I looked at him through the booth gap. He gave one small nod. I gave one back. That was all. In a hospital like Mercy Vale, a nod could be a confession. It could also be fear. I wrote both down when I got back to my room. At 10:17, I called my mother in Toledo. She answered on the second ring. Baby? I'm all right. That's not what I asked. I smiled then, a little. I know. My mother, Denise Carver, worked the front desk at a dental office on Dorr Street. She had my grandmother's calm and my aunt's mouth, and which one you got depended on your tone. She said, "You went to Mercy Vale today." Yes. And? They remembered Grandma. That hospital did not remember her right when she was living. I know. Did somebody say something to you? I looked at the legal pad. Cleaning lady sat there in blue ink. Yes. My mother did not ask what. She already knew the shape of it. Black women in pressed suits still get mistaken for service until somebody needs saving. My mother had lived long enough to recognize the old song by the first note. She said, "Did you raise your voice?" No, ma'am. Good. I wanted to. I know. He called me cleaning staff. She got quiet. Then she said, "Your grandmother cleaned plenty. She cleaned wounds. She cleaned charts. She cleaned messes doctors left behind." I thought about that. But he didn't mean it that way. No. Then make him say it to paper. I did. Good. I touched the badge. Mom, did Grandma ever tell you she bought hospital shares? Another silence. This one was family silence. It had drawers in it. She told me she saved, my mother said. For what? For you. My throat tightened, but my face stayed still. Did she say Mercy Vale? She said some doors open better if you own the hinges. That sounds like her. She was angry, Lena. I know. No, baby, you know the sweet part, church part, peppermint part. My mother breathed out. She was angry too. At Mercy Vale? At being passed over. At training men who became supervisors. At seeing girls from Briar Glen turned away from help because a form was wrong or a bill was old. She kept records. She kept everything. Do you know about a sealed file? No. Do you know about her badge? Which one? The brass one. My mother said, she told me not to lose that. You never told me. She told me you'd know when to carry it. I closed my eyes. There are times when grief walks into the room without knocking. I did not cry. I put my hand flat on the motel desk and waited until my breath settled. My mother said, "What's happening?" I don't know all of it yet. Tell me what you do know. I told her about the invoice. I told her about the charity transfers. I told her about Preston Vale Management, LLC. I told her about the bylaw section. I did not tell her every insult. A daughter can be grown and still spare her mother one cut when another will do. When I finished, she said, "Go to New Mount Zion tomorrow." I was thinking that. Go before the hospital. Why? Reverend Bell kept some of your grandmother's papers after the funeral. I sat straighter. What papers? I don't know. He said they were church records. Mom, I didn't ask. Your grandma was private. She was building something. She was always building something. Outside, a car door slammed. The wall unit rattled. My mother said, "Lena, listen to me." I'm listening. Don't let that man pull you into being loud for his comfort. I won't. He wants a scene he can name. I know, so don't give him one. I don't raise my voice, I said. My mother finished it for me. You read the line. After we hung up, I packed the badge in my purse instead of my suitcase. I put it in the inside pocket with the pen and the folded bylaw page. Then I slept in pieces. Not because I was scared, because my mind kept matching columns. North Star, March 18th, Restricted Reserve. Preston's LLC, Charity Clinic Shortfalls, Eleanor's badge. At 5:45, I gave up and dressed. I wore a charcoal suit that morning, not navy. white blouse, low heels, braids pinned neat. My grandmother used to press the heel of her hand against my kitchen table parts and say, "Neatness gets there before anger." I looked in the motel mirror, deep brown skin, clear eyes, no softness offered for free. Then I drove down Hawthorne Mill Road while Briar Glen was still waking up. New Mount Zion Baptist sat on Juniper Street between a daycare and a small brick house with tomato plants in paint buckets. The church sign had black plastic letters: Sunday school at 9, food pantry Thursday. Prayer still works. I parked under a maple tree and sat for a minute with both hands on the wheel. My grandmother had walked these steps in winter and heat after nights when Mercy Vale took everything from her feet and still asked for more. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the church smelled like floor polish, paper fans, and old hymnals. The sanctuary lights were low. A woman in a green cardigan was arranging envelopes on a table near the aisle. She looked up. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Reverend Bell." "He's in the office. Please tell him Lena Carver is here." Her face softened at my last name. That was the first door my grandmother opened that morning. She led me down a short hall past framed choir photos and a bulletin board with graduation pictures. One photo showed me at 18 in a white dress, holding a scholarship certificate. My grandmother stood beside me in a pale blue suit, brass badge pinned inside her purse flap because she had come straight from work. I had not known she wore it that day. Reverend Samuel Bell opened his office door before the woman knocked. He was thin, silver-haired, with reading glasses hanging from a cord. "Lena," he said. "Good morning, Reverend. You look like Eleanor when you're about to correct somebody." "That's been said." He laughed once and stepped aside. "Come in." His office was small, Bible on the desk, 2 chairs, a file cabinet with a plant on top. On the wall hung a photo of my grandmother serving plates in the fellowship hall. Reverend Bell did not ask why I was there. He opened the top drawer and took out a brown folder tied with cotton string. "Your mother called," he said. "When?" 6:10. "That sounds like her. She said you might need this." "What is it?" He placed the folder on the desk between us. "I don't know all of it. But you know some." He sat down slowly. "Eleanor gave it to me 2 months before she passed. She said if Mercy Vale ever sent for her name, I should send for you." I looked at the folder. Mercy Vale had not sent for her name. I had. "What did she mean?" I asked. "She said the hospital believed service meant silence." He folded his hands. She disagreed. I untied the string. Inside were copies, not originals. My grandmother had written that on the top page: copies for church file, originals with board custodian. Do not mail. Her handwriting made my chest hurt. Clean block letters, nurse letters, no wasted curves. The first document was a stock purchase confirmation from 1997. Mercy Vale Hospital Minority Share Lot, $2,000. Purchaser, Eleanor Carver. The second was from 2003, $5,000. The third was from 2009, $12,000. The fourth was different. It was a letter from a law office in Toledo dated May 16, 2018. Transfer instruction pending. Beneficiary, Lena Carver. Contingent governance rights tied to restricted charity misuse. I read that line twice. Reverend Bell watched me. "She was serious," he said. "She was exact. She was both." I turned another page. There was a copy of a handwritten note addressed to Reverend Bell. "If they call me sentimental, remind them I paid cash." I almost laughed. It came out as air. The next page listed donations Eleanor had made to Mercy Access Clinic after retirement: $750, $1,200, $900, $2,100, $480. Beside each amount, she had written what the money was meant to cover: insulin, transportation vouchers, children's antibiotics, blood pressure medicine, exam fee waivers. At the bottom, she had written one sentence: "Charity money is not spare change." I put my finger on that line. Preston had said restricted funds were flexible. My grandmother had answered him years before he opened his mouth. "Did she know Preston Vale?" I asked. Reverend Bell's face changed. "Yes." "How?" "He came here once." "When?" "After she filed a complaint." I looked up. "Against who?" "Mercy Vale." "For what?" He took off his glasses and cleaned them with a cloth. "Promotion denial, retaliation, missing charity credits. I don't know every detail." "Was it buried?" "Yes." "By Preston?" His father was still board chair then. Preston sat in the meeting. "The Vale family. There was the next door." "What was his father's name?" "Dr. Howard Vale." I wrote it down. Reverend Bell said, "Eleanor came here afterward. She sat in the second pew, didn't speak for an hour." "She cried?" "No." He looked at me kindly. "She counted." "That sounds right." "She had a yellow legal pad. She wrote down every person in that room." My hand tightened around my pen. "Do you have that list?" He reached back into the drawer and took out a smaller envelope. Copy. Inside was one sheet. Board Complaint Review, September 12, 2011. Howard Vale, Chair. Preston Vale, Medical Director. Arthur Blaine, Finance. Maribel Henson, Secretary. Ruth Klein, Community Member. Dr. Samuel Greer, Surgery. Dr. Lionel Pierce, Internal Medicine. Beside each name, Eleanor had written one word: dismissed, smirked, avoided, recorded, objected, silent, silent. Maribel recorded. Ruth objected. The rest lived with what they had done. I looked at the page until every name settled. "Ruth Klein," I said. "She still lives in Briar Glen," Reverend Bell said. "Oak Street. Was she on the board now?" "No. Pushed out after that year." "Why?" "She asked where the charity money went." "Of course she did." I put the sheet back in the envelope. "May I take these?" "Eleanor said you could." "Do I sign something?" He smiled. "Still an auditor." "Always." He pulled a church receipt pad from his drawer. "Then sign for it." I signed my name, Lena Carver, date, time, 7:22 a.m. Reverend Bell looked at my pen. "Is that hers?" "Yes." "She used that pen in church meetings." I thought it was just old. "No," he said. "It was her audit pen." I looked at him. He nodded toward the brass name badge in my open purse. And that badge got her into rooms where people forgot she could hear. I touched the purse flap. "So it wasn't decorative," I said. "Nothing Eleanor carried was decorative." At 7:36, my phone buzzed. "Maribel." I answered in Reverend Bell's office. "Yes." "Where are you?" "New Mount Zion." "Good," she said. "Stay there 10 minutes." "Why?" "Preston just told security to deny you entry." That was expected. He also told them to call local police if you approach records. I looked at Reverend Bell. He heard enough. His face went still. "On what grounds?" I asked. "Disruption." That word is doing a lot of unpaid work. He has invited the executive committee to meet at 8:30. With the doctors? Yes. Same room. Good. Not good. He's framing it first. Let him. Ms. Carver. Maribel, does Section 9.4 let an owner's representative request emergency review by written notice? Yes. Does it require physical presence to submit? No. I'm sending it now. With what attachment? I looked at the folder on the desk. A church copy of a 2018 transfer instruction. Maribel's breath caught. You have that? Yes. Send it to my personal email, now. Will that open the file? It may trigger review. May? There's a board chair. Who? Arthur Blaine. I looked at Eleanor's list. Arthur Blaine, Finance. Avoided. He was in the 2011 complaint review, I said. Maribel went silent. I said, he avoided then. He avoids now. Then he'll need help. Lena, listen carefully. Arthur has called a pre-meeting at 8:15. Preston will be there. Of course. They want a resolution saying your audit authority is suspended pending identity review. I almost laughed at that. Identity review. That is what people call it when a black woman shows documents they did not expect her to own. I said, they can review my identity in public. That's what I hoped you'd say. Send me the notice format. I already did. The email came through before she finished the sentence. Reverend Bell let me use his printer. I filled in the emergency ownership review notice at his desk. Grounds. Credible allegation that a chief officer used restricted hospital charity funds for private financial rescue. Supporting items. North Star invoice. Insulin transfer. Restricted clinic allocation. Vendor remittance to Preston Vale Management, LLC. Payroll support memo. Board packet reserve. Church copy of transfer instruction. Requested action. Open sealed ownership file pursuant to Section 9.4. I signed with the brass pen. Then I took out Eleanor's badge and placed it beside the page. I photographed them together on Reverend Bell's desk. Reverend Bell said, "That picture matters." Yes. Why? Because he thinks I came alone. I emailed the notice at 7:54. At 7:56, Maribel replied. Received, logged, time stamped. At 7:59, Preston called. I let it ring twice. Then I answered. Lena Carver. His voice was tight. What did you just send? A notice. You are not authorized to invoke that bylaw. Then deny it on the record. You're playing with things you don't understand. No, doctor. I'm reading what my grandmother understood. He went quiet. Then he said, Your grandmother? Yes. Eleanor was a nurse. She was. She was not ownership. You should come to the meeting. I'm already in the meeting. Then stay there. His laugh was ugly. You think a brass badge makes you somebody? There it was. He knew, not all of it. Enough to be afraid. I said, no, it proves who already was. He hung up again. Reverend Bell stood by the window. He called her Eleanor. Yes. Not Mrs. Carver. No. That tells you plenty. It does. I gathered the folder, receipt, badge, and pen. Before I left, Reverend Bell stopped me at the sanctuary door. You want prayer? Yes. He did not make it long. He put one hand over mine and said, Lord, keep her steady. Put truth in order. Let no proud hand scatter it. Amen, I said. Outside, the morning had brightened. I drove toward Mercy Vale with New Mount Zion in my rearview mirror and Eleanor's copies on the passenger seat. At 8:12, Maribel texted, Front entrance. Do not stop at security. At 8:20, I pulled into the visitor lot. Same glass, same polished sign. Mercy Vale Hospital. Serving Briar Glen families since 1964. The building looked less clean now. Not dirtier, just less convincing. 2 security guards stood inside the lobby doors. Cal Porter was one of them. The other was a broad woman with gray locks tucked under her cap. Her badge said Nadine Wells. Cal saw me first. He stepped forward. Ms. Carver. Mr. Porter. He lowered his voice. I was told to deny entry. I know. Nadine looked from him to me. You got paperwork? Yes. Show me. Cal glanced toward the elevators. Nadine. She did not look at him. I asked her. I handed Nadine the time-stamped notice on my phone and the printed copy from Reverend Bell's office. She read slowly. Her thumb paused on Maribel's receipt line. "This says board review," she said. "Yes." Cal shifted. "Dr. Vale said she's barred." Nadine handed the paper back. "Dr. Vale isn't the board." Cal's jaw tightened. I looked at him. "You can walk beside me again." He swallowed. "Yes, ma'am." That "yes, ma'am" did not erase yesterday. It did mark the first crack. We crossed the lobby together. People watched. Nurses at the coffee kiosk. A man in a wheelchair near admitting. 2 residents with badges turned backward. I kept my pace even. Preston wanted me dragged through a service door. I entered through the front with my grandmother's badge in my purse and his fear waiting upstairs. At the elevator, Cal pressed the button. He said, "I should have said something." "Yes. I have a mortgage." I didn't ask why. He looked down. I said, "Silence has reasons. It still has a sound." The doors opened. On the second floor, Maribel was waiting near the board offices. She wore the same gray suit, but this time she had a small silver key ring in her hand. Her eyes dropped once to my purse. "You brought it?" "Yes." "Good. Preston knows about the badge." Her face tightened. "How?" "He mentioned it. Then someone told him." "Who saw the file?" "Sealed contents? No one without authorization." "Who knew the badge mattered?" She looked toward the boardroom. "Arthur Blaine." I nodded. "Avoided." Maribel's eyes sharpened. "You saw the old complaint file." "A church copy." Eleanor trusted Reverend Bell. She did. She trusted very few. She chose well. Maribel opened her office door. The gray cabinet stood behind her desk, quiet and square. In daylight, I saw the lock plate better. It was not office furniture. It was bolted to the floor. "The vault," I said. "Yes." "Can you open it now?" "No." "Why?" 2-key system, mine and the board chairs. "Arthur." "Yes." "And if he refuses?" "Then his refusal goes into the minutes." "That's not enough." "It may be after your notice." I stepped closer to the cabinet. There was a narrow brass label holder on the second drawer. No label inside. "Is my name in there?" Maribel did not answer fast. Then she said, "Your grandmother's name is." "That's not what I asked." "I know." A knock hit the open door. Arthur Blaine stood in the hallway. He was in his late 60s, silver-haired, with a red tie and a watch that wanted to be noticed. I knew his face from the board packet photo. Finance chair, then board chair. Avoided in 2011. Still avoiding, now with better shoes. "Maribel," he said, "the committee is waiting." Then his eyes moved to me. "Ms. Carver," he said, "this is unfortunate." "For whom?" His mouth tightened. "Your presence is not approved." My notice was received. "That notice is defective." "Which section?" He blinked once. "We'll discuss that inside." "Good. I brought my pen." Arthur looked at the brass pen in my hand. Something passed over his face. Not shock. Memory. He said, "Where did you get that?" "Family." Eleanor should have let old matters rest. Maribel's hand closed around the keyring. I said, "She did rest. The matters didn't." Arthur looked at Maribel. "Do not open that cabinet." Maribel's voice stayed smooth. "If Section 9.4 is invoked, I'm required to preserve the file." "Preserve, not open." "Correct." He turned back to me. "You're being used." "By whom?" "People with grudges." "Against missing charity money?" "That language is reckless." Then corrected in the meeting. He stepped closer. "Young lady, Mercy Vale is not your inheritance." There it was, not the full truth. A partial one he meant as a door slammed shut. I looked him in the eye. Then you won't mind opening the file. Arthur's face hardened. Behind him, down the hall, Preston Vale appeared in a dark suit and white coat. He had put the coat on for theater. The chief, the doctor, the man with his name on the sign, even though signs can lie. He saw me standing in Maribel's office and stopped. Then he smiled. Not because he was calm, because the hallway had witnesses. "Ms. Carver?" he called. "You found the front door." Nadine Wells had followed us up. She stood near the elevator with her hands folded. Cal stood beside her. Maribel remained at my right. Arthur blocked half the doorway. I stepped into the hall. "Yes," I said. It opened. Preston's smile thinned. "The committee has agreed to hear your confusion," he said. "How generous." "You'll have 5 minutes." I requested an emergency ownership review. You requested a fantasy. Arthur said, "Preston." Preston ignored him. His eyes stayed on me. "Bring whatever little church paper you found," he said. "We'll settle it." Church paper. He had just dragged New Mount Zion into a hospital hallway because he thought a black woman's documents lost weight if they smelled like pew wood and Sunday envelopes. I did not give him heat. Heat was for people who needed to burn. I had pages. I said, "After you, doctor." We walked into the boardroom. It was not the main conference room from yesterday. Smaller. 10 leather chairs. A wall screen. Coffee service on a side table. Still, 3 of yesterday's doctors were there, invited like Preston needed an audience before breakfast. Dr. Samuel Greer sat near the screen, older now than on Eleanor's list, but still straight-backed. Silent then, silent now. Doctor. Lionel Pierce sat beside him, tapping his phone. Silent then. Phone now. Dr. Anika Shah sat near the end, the only physician in the room who looked at me like I belonged to my own name. Ellen Price from pharmacy stood against the wall with a folder clutched to her chest. Grace Morton from the charity wing sat beside her. Dennis Hale stood near the coffee table, eyes down. Cal stayed by the door. Nadine stayed outside it. Maribel took her seat at the end with her notebook. Arthur sat at the head. Preston remained standing. He liked height. Men like him often do. It lets them mistake posture for proof. Arthur cleared his throat. This is an executive committee update regarding yesterday's disruption and a purported emergency notice. Maribel said, "For the minutes, the notice was received at 7:56 a.m. and logged at 7:56 a.m. Arthur's jaw moved. Noted. Preston placed both hands on the table. Yesterday, he said, Ms. Carver entered operational areas under questionable authority, upset staff, demanded sensitive records, and exceeded any reasonable scope. I opened my folder. He looked at me. You'll have your turn. I'm making sure you get yours right. Dr. Greer looked down. Dr. Shaw's mouth almost moved. Preston continued. Mercy Vale has served Briar Glen for decades. We cannot allow outside actors to destabilize care based on personal resentment. Personal. That was how men shrink ledgers. They call money personal when a woman finds the drawer. Arthur said, Ms. Carver, do you deny being removed yesterday? No. Preston smiled. I added, I object to the reason. Arthur leaned back. State your position. Dr. Vale revoked a board-authorized audit badge during an active review. He ordered security to remove me after I asked about restricted charity transfers. Preston said, false. Ellen Price's grip tightened on her folder. I looked at her. Ms. Price, did I ask about a March 18th insulin transfer? Ellen swallowed. Preston turned. Ellen. She did not look at him. Yes. Was it $12,300? I asked. Yes. Was it marked executive request? Yes. Preston snapped, That's privileged. Maribel said, Financial classification is not privileged. Grace Morton raised one hand slightly. The charity clinic allocation that day was $31,500. Arthur looked at her. Ms. Morton, you were not asked to speak. Grace's cheeks colored, but she kept going. Only $7,840 hit patient accounts. The room changed, quietly. Not enough for Preston to lose control, enough for him to feel the floor. I wrote Grace Morton beside the word spoke. Preston said, Those were temporary reallocations. I said, To Preston Vale Management, LLC. Dr. Shaw looked up fully. Arthur said, Ms. Carver. I slid copies across the table. Vendor remittance, payroll support memo, public filing, same entity. Preston did not touch them. Arthur did. His eyes moved over the first page. This is incomplete, he said. Then open the complete records. Preston laughed. You keep saying open like this is your house. No, I said. I keep saying open because it's a hospital. Doctor. Shaw reached for the copy Arthur had set down. Preston said, This is exactly the problem. She's theatrical. I looked at him. The North Star invoice was dated February 11th. He frowned. Operating room 3 was closed that day, I said. Humidity failure? Maintenance log confirms it. Dennis Hale closed his eyes. I turned to him. Mr. Hale? He opened them. Preston said, Don't. Dennis rubbed his hands together. OR 3 was closed. For the whole day? Yes. Did North Star deliver surgical supplies for that room? He looked at Preston, then at me. No. The word landed plain. I wrote it down. No. Preston's face had gone pale around the mouth. Arthur said, This is outside the agenda. Maribel said, It supports the 9.4 notice. The 9.4 notice is not valid, Arthur said. On what basis? I asked. He tapped the paper. This transfer instruction is a church copy. Correct. It's not certified. The original is in your vault. He froze. Preston looked at Arthur. That was the first time I saw them both lose the same second. I said, Or it isn't. Maribel sat very still. Arthur placed the church copy flat on the table. This committee will not be bullied. I'm not bullying you. You're making accusations. I'm reading dates. Preston leaned forward. You're reading scraps your grandmother left because she couldn't accept her place. The room went very quiet. There it was, the big line, not hidden in policy, not dressed as concern. A man telling a black nurse's granddaughter that her grandmother should have accepted a lower place and stayed there. My face did not move. Inside, I put that sentence beside cleaning lady. I gave it a number. I said, Please repeat that. He blinked. What? For the minutes. Maribel's pen waited. Preston looked around and realized the room had heard him. Dr. Shaw's eyes were cold. Grace Morton stared at the table. Ellen Price pressed her lips together. Dennis Hale looked ashamed. Dr. Greer looked at the floor. Dr. Pierce stopped tapping his phone. Arthur said, Preston. I said, No, let him correct it. Preston straightened. I said this is personal resentment. No, I said. You said my grandmother couldn't accept her place. He did not answer. I turned to Maribel. Please note the correction refusal. Maribel wrote it down. Preston's hands curled once, then opened. Arthur stood. We're taking a recess. I looked at the clock, 8:59. No, Maribel said. Every head turned. Arthur stared at her. Excuse me. Maribel opened the bylaw binder in front of her. Section 9.4 states that upon timely notice and credible supporting grounds, the record's custodian shall preserve the sealed ownership file and call for board chair review without recess unless safety or care operations require it. Arthur said, "I am the board chair." "Yes," Maribel said. "So review it." He held out his hand. "Give me your key." "No." Maribel. "The bylaw requires 2-key access, not key surrender." Preston said, "This is absurd." "Doctor," Shaw spoke then. "I'd like to see the file preserved." Arthur turned. "You're not on ownership." "No," she said. "I'm on ethics." Preston gave her a hard look. "This isn't an ethics matter." She looked at the charity clinic papers. It became one at $31,500. Ellen Price lifted her folder. "I have the pharmacy disposal logs." Preston snapped, "Ellen, sit down." "I'm standing." Her voice shook, but she stayed upright. Grace Morton said, "I have redacted patient assistant summaries." Dennis Hale said nothing, but he took one folded paper from his shirt pocket and placed it on the table. Maintenance closure log. OR3, February 11th. One by one, the rooms stopped being Preston's room. Not because they were brave yesterday. They had not been. But today there were documents on the table, and documents give frightened people a place to stand. Arthur looked at the papers. Then he looked at me. "You planned this," he said. "No. That was the truth. My grandmother planned farther than I did. I only followed the line." Preston stepped away from the table. "This meeting is over." Maribel closed the bylaw binder. "No, doctor, it's recorded." He turned to her. "You work for this hospital." "I do." "Then act like it." "I am." Arthur's phone buzzed. He looked down. His face tightened. "Who is it?" Preston asked. Arthur did not answer. Maribel's phone buzzed next. Then Dr. Shaw's. My phone followed. An email from the hospital board distribution list. Subject: Emergency Ownership Review Notice Received. Maribel had logged it wide. Not public, not press. Just enough board members that Arthur could not bury it in his palm. Preston read his screen. His face changed slowly. "You sent this to the full board?" he said. Maribel said, "The bylaw required notice. You had no authority. I had an obligation." Arthur sat down again, heavier this time. I looked at the gray morning light on the boardroom window. Hawthorne Mill Road ran beyond the parking lot. Cars moved past like any other day. Briar Glen had no idea a locked file had started breathing upstairs. Preston pointed at me. "You think this makes you legitimate?" I put my grandmother's brass badge on the table. Not hard, not dramatic, just flat enough that everyone could see the name. Eleanor Carver, RN. "No," I said. "She did." Arthur stared at the badge like it had spoken out loud. For a second, nobody moved toward it. That little brass rectangle sat in the middle of polished wood, scratched at the edge, the pin bent from years on cotton uniforms and navy sweaters. I had watched my grandmother wipe that badge with the corner of a dish towel at our kitchen table. She never used polish, just warm water, patience, and her thumb. Preston looked at it and smiled too late. "A keepsake," he said. I looked at him. "Yes." He reached for it. My hand covered it first. His fingers stopped inches from mine. "Don't touch it," I said. Those 3 words were not loud. They did not need to be. A room knows when a woman has reached the end of being handled. Arthur cleared his throat. "Ms. Carver, personal items don't create standing." "No," I said, "but they identify a file." Maribel's pen paused. Arthur's eyes cut to her. There it was, the little movement, the kind men make when they learn the servant they ignored has been watching the door. Preston said, "What file?" I looked at Maribel. May I ask the records custodian a question? Arthur said, No. Maribel said, You may. Arthur turned on her. Maribel. She did not flinch. The notice is active. I kept my eyes on her. Does Mercyvale index sealed files by badge number? Maribel's face went still. Preston laughed once. That's ridiculous. Does it? I asked. Maribel opened a thin black ledger beside her notebook. Not the bylaw binder, older. The cover had a cracked spine and a paper label taped across the front. She turned 3 pages with care. Arthur stood. Close that. Maribel did not look up. The index isn't sealed. It is board property. Yes, she said, and the board is in session. I watched her finger move down the page. My grandmother's name was there before she said it. I knew because Maribel's mouth changed. Eleanor Carver, she read. Employee badge number 6174, cross-reference to sealed ownership file C-22. Preston stopped smiling. Arthur said, That file was dormant. Maribel looked at him then. Dormant isn't void. Doctor, Shaw leaned forward. What does C-22 mean? Arthur said, It means nothing until reviewed. It means a controlling instrument may exist, Maribel said. The room tightened around that word. Controlling. Preston's jaw moved, but no sound came. Men like him loved words like flexible and operational. They did not like controlling unless it was in their own mouth. I slid the badge back toward my folder. Thank you. Arthur pointed at the ledger. That stays closed. Maribel closed it. The index has been read into minutes. Preston leaned across the table. You're implying this woman owns Mercyvale. This woman, cleaning lady, had put on a suit and come back with a badge number. He needed a smaller name for me again. I let him search and fail. I haven't implied anything, Maribel said. I identified a record. Arthur lifted one palm. This is exactly why we need counsel. I said, Is hospital counsel in the building? Maribel answered, Yes. Call them. Arthur's face sharpened. I decide that. No, Dr. Shaw said. Legal exposure decides that. Dr. Greer finally looked up. His face had the tired look of a man who had spent years stepping over things and now found one at his own chair. Arthur, he said, call counsel. Preston turned. Sam? Dr. Greer did not look at him. Call counsel. Dr. Pierce put his phone face down. I agree. That made Preston blink. Phone now had a spine. Arthur said, Fine, counsel can attend. But the file remains unopened. I said, Until? Until full board authority is established. Maribel tapped the bylaw binder. Emergency authority is established by chair review. I am not reviewing under pressure. I picked up my pen. Please note refusal. Arthur's face flushed. Do not instruct my secretary. Maribel said, She didn't. Preston stepped back from the table. This is becoming a circus. No, I said. A circus sells tickets. Dr. Shaw's eyes flicked to me. I turned one page in my folder. This sells insulin twice. Ellen Price made a small sound. Preston's head came around. What did you say? I placed 2 papers side by side. March 18th, pharmacy transfer marked charity allocation, $12,300. Same day, same quantity, same lot family appears on a resale credit through North Star Medical Supply. Ellen came closer. That's not possible. It's possible if the shipment never came back to pharmacy, I said. She looked at the paper. Her voice dropped. That lot was for clinic patients? Yes. Grace Morton leaned in. How many? 41 assistance accounts were marked fulfilled, I said. Only 11 had matching dispensing records. Grace shut her eyes for one breath. I did not make the room imagine people. I did not need to. Everybody in Mercy Vale knew what insulin meant in Briar Glen. They knew the church ladies who split pills until the next Social Security check. They knew the fathers who came in after factory shifts from outside Toledo, still smelling like machine oil, asking if the clinic could wait on payment until Friday. Preston said, "You're not qualified to interpret medication records. I'm qualified to match dates. Pharmacy reconciliation is complex. Not this line." Arthur reached for the papers. "Where did you get these?" "Hospital export." Preston snapped, "Unauthorized." Maribel said her audit badge was valid when the export was generated. Arthur looked at her like he wished she were furniture. She looked back like she had never been furniture a day in her life. The boardroom door opened. A woman in a black suit stepped in with a laptop under one arm. I had seen her name on the hospital website, Carol Vance, General Counsel. She was short, white-haired, and unsmiling in a way that felt practiced, not cruel. "What's been read?" she asked. Arthur said, "Nothing material." Maribel said, "The active notice, the bylaw section, the index entry for sealed file C-22, and multiple financial exhibits." Carol Vance looked at Arthur. "That sounds material." Preston said, "Carol, this is a hostile disruption." She set her laptop down. "Then stop talking." He stared at her. She sat beside Maribel. "Who is the requesting party?" I raised my hand slightly. "Lena Carver." Her eyes moved over me, not dismissing, measuring. "Basis?" "Restricted charity funds routed through Preston Vale Management, LLC, false vendor remittances, and a sealed ownership file tied to Eleanor Carver." Carol's face did not change. "Are you represented?" "Not in this room." "Do you understand that allegations can carry consequences?" "Yes." Preston jumped on it. "Exactly." Carol looked at him. "For everyone." He went quiet. I handed her a clean packet. "The first tab is the money trail. The second is the schedule match. The third is the ownership notice. The church copy is marked." Carol opened the packet. She did not rush. She read like a woman who knew a rushed page could cost a building. "The $420,000 line," she said. "Who prepared this summary?" "I did." "Source?" "Bank remittance references from the audit export, county filings for Preston Vale Management, LLC, and internal charity allocation reports." Preston said, "Those are preliminary." Carol said, "I'm reading." He sat down. That was the first time all morning he obeyed a woman without making her ask twice. Carol turned another page. "Payroll support memo. Recipient entity, Preston Vale Management, LLC. Amount, $420,000. Internal note says temporary float." I wrote the words down, though I already knew them. Temporary float. That was rich people language for taking from the weak and naming it weather. Grace Morton spoke softly. "The clinic shortage last quarter was 418,600. Carol looked at her. "Say that again." Grace sat straighter. "The patient charity clinic shortage was $418,600. Documented?" "Yes." "Bring it." Grace stood. Preston said, "Grace." She looked at him. Her hand shook, but her voice did not. "No." That no was small. It still cut him. She left the room fast. Cal opened the door for her. Nadine stood just outside, watching the hall like she had been born for that post. Carol turned to Arthur. "Where is file C-22? Arthur said, "In the records vault." "Who has keys?" "Maribel and I." "Has anyone accessed it since the notice?" "No." Maribel said, "I can verify my key remained with me." Carol looked at Arthur. "Can you?" Arthur's face stiffened. "Of course." "Answer cleanly." "Yes." I watched Preston then, not Arthur. Preston's eyes had gone to the window, then to the door, then to the side table where the coffee service sat. He was looking for an exit that would not look like running. Carol said, "We need to preserve the file." Arthur said, "Agreed. Now." He hesitated. Preston said, "Carol, opening that vault under these conditions would validate harassment." "No," she said. "It prevents spoliation claims." That word put a new silence in the room. Spoliation. Even the doctors understood that one. Destroyed records had a smell before anyone found smoke. Arthur removed a key from his inside jacket pocket. He held it too tightly. Maribel stood with hers. My chest did not lift. My hands did not shake. But inside, I heard Reverend Bell's voice. "Put truth in order." Carol looked at me. "You'll remain here." "No," I said. "I invoked the notice. I'm observing preservation." Arthur snapped, "Absolutely not." Carol studied me. "You may stand at the office door. You don't touch the cabinet. You don't enter the file room." "Agreed." Preston stood. "Then I'm coming." Carol said, "No. I'm chief. You're named in the allegations." His face went hard. "Be careful, Carol." She closed the folder. That was poor advice. Dr. Shaw rose. "I'll observe." Arthur said, "You're not needed." Carol said, "Ethics observer is appropriate." Dr. Shaw joined us. Ellen stayed by the wall. Dennis sat like a man waiting for a bill he already knew he owed. Dr. Greer watched his own hands. Dr. Pierce stared at the badge on the table. I picked it up and slid it back into my purse. Preston saw me do it. He said, "Still carrying someone else's name." I looked at him. "No." She carried mine forward. We walked down the hall to Maribel's office. It was only a few steps, but it felt longer because everybody knew the building had shifted. Nurses near the elevators looked up. One resident pretended to read a chart and failed. Nadine moved ahead of us and cleared the doorway without making a show of it. Maribel unlocked her office. The gray cabinet waited behind her desk. Arthur stopped just inside. "This is preservation only." Carol said, "Say what you're doing." Maribel held up her key. "Records custodian key entering left lock." Arthur held up his. "Board chair key entering right lock." I stood in the doorway with Dr. Shaw beside me. I could see the cabinet, Maribel's shoulder, and Arthur's hand. His thumb pressed white against the key. "Turn on 3, Maribel said. Arthur did not answer. 1, she said. 2, 3. Both keys turned. The sound was small, a thick click, not dramatic, not enough for thunder, just metal admitting that it could not lie anymore. Maribel pulled the second drawer open. Inside were red file jackets, each one sealed with a numbered strip. She moved past 2, then 3. Her finger stopped. C-22, she said. I did not move. Arthur reached toward it. Carol said, "Maribel handles the file." His hand withdrew. Maribel lifted the red jacket. The seal was intact. White strip, blue ink, 2 signatures across the flap. One was Maribel's, the other was Arthur's, older and thinner than the one he used now. Carol leaned close. Seal appears intact. Maribel said, "Agreed." "Doctor?" Shaw said, "Agreed." I said nothing because nobody asked me, and because the sight of my grandmother's name through that little clear label made my mouth go dry. Eleanor Carver. Not a keepsake, not a complaint, not a woman who should have accepted her place. A file. Maribel placed the jacket into a clear evidence sleeve. Carol initialed the sleeve. Dr. Shaw signed as witness. Arthur signed last, pressing hard enough to nearly tear the label. Carol said, "Return it to the cabinet pending board session." I turned to her. "Pending when?" Arthur answered fast. "After proper scheduling." Carol looked at him. "Today." Preston's voice came from behind me. No. He had stepped into the hall. Cal stood near him, uneasy. Nadine had one hand raised between Preston and the office threshold. Carol walked to the doorway. You were told not to come. Preston pointed past her. That file doesn't leave records. It isn't leaving records. You're putting my hospital in the hands of a stranger. My hospital. There it was again. The old family wallpaper. Say a thing long enough and hope the deed gets tired. I stepped into the hall. Then prove it's yours. His eyes came to me. You don't know what Eleanor was. I felt that name in his mouth and did not like it. Say Mrs. Carver, I said. He laughed under his breath. She was a bitter night nurse. Nadine's face changed. Cal looked down. A nurse at the station stopped typing. Preston kept going because pride is a bad driver. She hated my father because he knew standards. Arthur said, Preston, stop. No, Preston said. We're all pretending this is noble. She bought scraps, that's all. Scraps from scared retirees, widows, old orderlies who didn't understand value. Carol turned slowly toward Arthur. Did you know about that? Arthur said, About what? The buybacks. Preston realized what he had said. I did too. Scraps from scared retirees. That was not in any packet I had shown him. Maribel's eyes found mine. New line, new door. I said, What buybacks? Preston's mouth closed. Carol said, Dr. Vale. Arthur lifted both hands. Historical employee shares were handled decades ago. How many? I asked. Arthur looked at me. This isn't relevant. It is if Eleanor bought what your family tried to claw back. Preston said, You don't understand capital structure. I understand fear. His face darkened. I opened my folder right there in the hall and took out the church copy. Eleanor's transfer letter mentions 31 years of purchases. It doesn't mention forced buybacks. Arthur said, because there weren't forced buybacks. Maribel said, there were repurchase campaigns. Everybody looked at her. She stood in her office doorway, the clear-sleeved file on the cabinet behind her, her key still in her hand. Arthur said, Maribel. She said, I typed some of the letters. The hall went silent. Preston's voice dropped. Don't do this. Maribel looked at him. You did it already. Carol asked, What letters? Maribel did not blink. Employees were told their old shares had no practical value. Some sold them back to the hospital foundation for small checks. How small? I asked. She swallowed. 200, 500, sometimes less. I thought of the clinic shortage, 418,600. I thought of the payroll line, 420,000. I thought of an orderly signing away a piece of a hospital for less than a month of groceries. And Eleanor? Carol asked. Maribel looked at me. She bought from them instead. Arthur's voice came sharp. That's speculation. No, Maribel said. I notarized 2 of them. There was my grandmother again, moving through the building before me, not loud, not asking permission, buying back dignity in small checks while the Vale family called it scraps. Preston turned away, then turned back. Even if she did, she's gone. Gone. That word hit clean. Promotion gone. Pension shifts gone. Name on the door gone. Charity money gone. Patient credits gone. Respect offered and refused. Gone. I said, and still you're afraid of her file. He stepped closer. Nadine moved between us. Back up, doctor, she said. He looked at her uniform. You work security? Yes. Then secure the area. I am. I almost smiled. Almost. Carol said, we return to the boardroom, now. Arthur said, the file stays locked until the full board arrives. Carol answered, the file stays preserved until the emergency session. I'm notifying all voting members to appear by noon. I checked the hall clock. 9:37. Preston heard it too. He knew noon was not a delay. Noon was a wall moving toward him. He pulled out his phone. Carol said, "Do not contact witnesses." He smiled without warmth. "I'm calling my father." Arthur closed his eyes. That was the second villain stepping out from behind the curtain. Not new, old. The Vale family had been in every hallway already. Preston was just the son with a white coat. Carol said, "Is Dr. Harrison Vale a voting board member?" Arthur said nothing. Maribel answered, "Emeritus, non-voting." Preston held the phone to his ear. "He founded this hospital." I said, "Eleanor worked nights in it." He looked at me like that was supposed to be less. I looked back because it was not. His call connected. His voice changed, softer, younger. "Dad, you need to come in." He listened, then his eyes moved to me. "Yes," he said, "her granddaughter." A pause. "No, she has the badge." Arthur's face lost color. I heard a man's voice through the phone, low and rough, not words I could catch. Preston turned away, but not fast enough. Carol heard enough, too. "End that call." Preston said, "I'll call you back." He put the phone down. I asked, "Why does he care about the badge?" Preston said, "He doesn't." Arthur said, "Lena." It was the first time he used my first name. That told me more than his documents had. I turned to him. "Don't soften now." His face tightened with something almost like shame. Almost is not enough. Maribel locked the cabinet again with the file inside the clear sleeve. Both keys turned back. The thick click returned. The file was not open, but it was awake. When we returned to the boardroom, Grace Morton was back with a blue folder. Ellen Price had spread pharmacy logs on the table. Dennis Hale's maintenance log sat beside the North Star invoice. The room had become less polished and more useful. Grace handed Carol the folder. Charity clinic shortage last quarter. Carol read the first page. $418,600. Grace nodded. "We delayed voucher approvals." "How many patients?" I asked. 72. Preston said, "Temporary delays." Grace looked at him. Mrs. Alvarez skipped 2 appointments. He frowned. "Don't bring patient stories into governance." "She brought a jar of coins," Grace said, "for a $12 copay she didn't owe." The room absorbed that one. I wrote $12 beside $420,000. That was the ledger, not money for show. Money with faces attached, even when we did not name all the faces. Ellen Price slid one sheet to Carol. "Disposal logs don't match." Preston said, "Ellen." She ignored him. "There are reversals entered under my credentials." Carol asked, "Did you enter them?" "No." "When did you notice?" Ellen's eyes filled, but she did not cry. "Yesterday, after Ms. Carver asked about March 18th. Preston laughed. "Convenient." Ellen turned on him. "You told me to stop looking." "I told you to follow chain of command. You told me charity inventory was above my pay grade." That phrase sat there, ugly and familiar, above my pay grade. Accept your place, just wearing a pharmacy coat. Dr. Shaw said, "Who else had access to her credentials?" Ellen said, "IT can tell you." Carol looked at Arthur. "Call IT security." Arthur said, "Now?" Carol's stare was answer enough. He made the call. Preston sat very still. I had seen stillness like that before, but not in boardrooms. I had seen it in children caught near a broken lamp, hoping nobody asked about the ball in the corner. Arthur spoke into the phone. "This is Arthur Blaine. I need access logs for pharmacy reversals under Ellen Price. March through current. Yes, now." He listened, then said, "Send to Carol Vance." Carol held out her hand. "Speaker." Arthur put the phone on speaker. A man's voice came through. "This is Jonah in IT. I can pull preliminary in 5. Carol said, "Pull March 18th first." "Yes, ma'am." Preston shifted. "This is excessive." "No," I said. "Excessive is a $12 copay on a voucher you already funded." He looked at me. "You have no idea what it takes to run a hospital." "I know what it takes to hide one." Dr. Greer exhaled slowly. Arthur's phone chimed. So did Carol's laptop. She opened the email and read without expression. "March 18th, pharmacy reversal," she said. "Credentials, Ellen Price. Terminal location, executive suite." Ellen whispered, "I wasn't there." Carol continued, "Device assigned to Preston Vale Management LLC." Preston stood so fast his chair hit the wall. "That's wrong." Carol looked up. "Sit down." "That is wrong." "Then sit down and let it be verified." He did not sit. Nadine appeared in the doorway. She did not enter. She did not need to. Preston saw her. His face hardened. "You're all enjoying this," he said. Nobody answered. He turned to me. "Especially you." I closed my folder. "No." He waited, wanting more. I gave him only the line. "I don't raise my voice." I read the line. Carol looked at Arthur. "Noon, full board, same room." Arthur nodded once. Preston said, "My father will be here." I put my pen beside my folder. "Good," I said. He stared at me. I thought of my grandmother leaving Mercy Vale after night shift, walking out to the employee lot before sunrise, tired feet, pressed hair tucked under a scarf, brass badge pinned straight. I thought of her buying what they called scraps from people they thought had no memory. I thought of her writing my name somewhere behind a locked gray drawer. Then I looked at Preston Vale, who had refused my hand because he thought the front door belonged to him. "Tell him to bring his key," I said. Preston did not answer me right away. That was new too. He had words for nurses, words for pharmacy clerks, words for me when he thought I was a black woman in the wrong hallway with a folder too nice for my station. But the word key had moved something in him. His mouth tightened, and the skin around his eyes went pale. Arthur looked toward the door. "We're adjourned until noon." Carol said, "No, we're in recess." "That's what I meant." "No," she said, "it isn't. Small corrections matter. My grandmother taught me that while she hemmed my choir dress at our kitchen table. A crooked hem did not become straight because you called it fine. A stolen dollar did not become afloat because a rich man typed it in blue ink." Preston picked up his phone again. Carol said, "Dr. Vale?" He lowered it, but his thumb still moved. Nadine stepped into the room. "Doctor, I need the phone visible." He looked at her. "Excuse me?" "Visible," she said. "I'm not handing my phone to security." I didn't ask for it. Carol watched him. Place it face down on the table. Preston laughed once. "You've lost control of this meeting." Arthur rubbed his forehead. "Preston, do it." That was the first time Arthur sounded tired of him instead of afraid of him. Preston placed the phone on the table. Face down, too slow, too angry. The little black screen sat beside the pharmacy logs like one more thing that had seen too much. Grace Morton returned to her seat. She kept the blue charity folder against her chest. Ellen Price sat beside her now, not across the room where Preston could isolate her with a glance. "Doctor." Shaw stood near the window. Dr. Greer had not spoken in a while. Dr. Pierce had moved his coffee cup away from Preston's side of the table, which was small and still not nothing. Dennis Hale leaned forward. "There's more on North Star." Carol turned to him. "Say it." Dennis opened his folder. "The freight slips don't match receiving." Preston said, "Maintenance isn't finance." Dennis looked at him. "No, but trucks come to loading docks. I looked at Dennis then. He had laughed the first morning, not loud, but enough. He had called me ma'am later, like that would polish the sound out of the air. It did not. Still, now he had brought paper. Carol said, "What slips?" Dennis slid 3 copies forward. North Star billed $268,900 for surgical lights and mounts. Arthur frowned. Those were approved capital improvements. Dennis nodded. For operating room 4. I opened my notebook. OR4 was closed that week. Dennis looked at me. It was closed 3 months. Preston's jaw moved. Dennis tapped the first page. The freight slip says delivered to Mercy Vale loading dock on February 12th at 6:10 in the morning. I was on snow duty that day. No truck came. Carol asked, "How do you know?" Dennis took out another sheet. Plow log, salt log, dock camera service ticket. The camera was down from 5:58 to 7:15. Doctor. Shaw stepped closer. Convenient. Dennis said, "Too convenient." That one made Preston turn. Careful. Dennis met his eyes. I am being careful. Carol read the delivery line. Received by D. Hale. Dennis held up both hands. That's not my signature. I leaned over the copy. The D was wrong, too narrow. The Hale ran together like someone had seen his name on a badge but never watched him sign a work order. I said, "Who approved payment?" Grace answered before Preston could. Executive authorization. Carol looked down. Preston Vale. Preston said, "Capital purchases are routine." I said, "So is checking if the room exists." He looked at me with that old disgust coming back. "You really enjoy playing auditor." "No," I said. "I am one." He smiled with his mouth only. "You're a girl with inherited paper." There it was, girl. Cleaning lady had put a mop in my hand. Girl tried to put me back on somebody's back porch with my Sunday shoes still dusty. I felt it. I did not feed it. I wrote $268,900 under $420,000. Carol said, "Dennis, did you report the signature issue?" He looked down. I asked procurement. When? February 20th. What did they say? He glanced at Preston. They said Dr. Vale had already resolved it. Carol's pen stopped. Who said that? Dennis swallowed. Margot in procurement. Arthur said, "Where is Margot today?" Grace answered, "Out. Personal leave." Preston leaned back. "So now we're convicting people who aren't present." Carol said, "No one is being convicted." You could have fooled me. I looked at his phone. Did you text Margot? The room turned toward me. Preston did not move. Carol said, "Answer." He smiled. No. Nadine said, "Phone lit twice." Carol held out her hand. "Show the lock screen." Preston did not touch it. Arthur said, "Preston, you all need to remember who built this place." I looked at the walls then. Framed photographs hung behind him. Groundbreaking day, new wing day, charity gala day, men in suits holding big scissors, women in uniforms standing behind them with tired smiles. My grandmother was not in any of those frames. That did not mean she was not in the walls. The boardroom door opened before anyone knocked. An older man stepped in with a cane he did not need as much as he wanted us to see. He was tall, silver-haired, dressed in a dark suit with a Mercy Vale pin on his lapel. His face had Preston's bones with less softness left. Behind him came a woman from administration I had seen only on badges and emails. Carol stood. Arthur stood. Preston stood so fast his chair scraped again. "Dad," Preston said. Dr. Harrison Vale did not look at him first. He looked at me. His eyes went to my navy suit, then my braids, then my folder, then my face, as if my deep brown skin was another document he needed to discredit before it entered evidence. "You're Eleanor's girl," he said. I stayed seated. "I'm Lena Carver." He nodded once. "Same trouble, new shoes." The room heard it. "Good. Some lines deserve witnesses." Carol said, "Dr. Harrison Vale, this is a board recess." He looked at her. "I was called by my son." "You're non-voting." "I know what I am." "I thought, yes, sir. So do I." Arthur's face had gone tight again. "Harrison, perhaps we should speak outside." "No." Harrison walked to the table and placed both hands on the back of Preston's chair. "If Eleanor's name is in my boardroom, I'll hear it. My boardroom, my hospital, my standards. Men like that put my before everything they feared losing." Carol said, "Then you'll sit as a non-voting observer." Harrison smiled faintly. "I sat on this board before you passed the bar. And today, you sit as a non-voting observer." For a second, I liked Carol Vance. Not warmly, not fully, but enough. Harrison lowered himself into the chair beside Preston. "Where's the file?" Carol said, "Preserved." "Opened?" "No." His eyes came back to me. "Then she doesn't know what she's holding." I said, "I know enough." "No," he said. "Eleanor knew enough. You have her pen and her temper, not her reach." My purse sat by my knee. The EC pen was inside, capped, wrapped in the small cloth from my mother's church. I did not touch it. I did not need a prop to remember whose hand had held it first. Arthur said, "Harrison, we're reviewing financial concerns." Harrison waved a hand. "Financial concerns. That's what they call a family being ambushed." Grace Morton's voice came low. 72 patients were delayed. He looked at her like she was a chair that had spoken. "Who are you?" Grace's hand tightened on the blue folder. "Grace Morton, Charity Clinic Director." "I didn't ask for your title." She blinked. I said, "You did." Harrison turned his head slowly. "What?" "You asked who she was." She answered. Preston muttered, "Lena." I looked at him. "Don't soften now." Harrison studied me. Then he smiled, and it was worse than his anger. Eleanor used to speak like that too. Careful little sentences, clean shoes. She thought if she sounded proper enough, men would forget she came in through the employee entrance. There it was, not the son's insult, the father's root. I felt the room go still around me. Not because the words surprised them, because they had finally been spoken without perfume. I said, "She came in for night shift." Harrison said, "She came in where she belonged." Nadine took one step inside the door. Cal appeared behind her. He looked younger than he had that morning. Carol said, "Dr. Vale, that is enough." Harrison did not look away from me. "No, counselor. Enough was when this hospital gave that woman a steady paycheck, and she repaid it by collecting scraps from people who didn't know better." Maribel's hand went to her throat. I turned to her. "You typed the letters?" She nodded once. Harrison saw it. Maribel. Her name in his mouth carried 30 years of habit. She stood by the sideboard. "Yes, Doctor. Vale. You've been well treated here." Her face changed. "Not much. Enough." "No," she said. "I've been retained." That landed harder than anger. Carol said, "Maribel, do you have records of the repurchase campaign?" Maribel looked at Arthur. Arthur said, "Don't answer from memory." Maribel said, "I'm not." She opened the slim black binder she had carried in with the preserved file log. "I made an index in 1999. Employee share repurchase letters, old foundation format, box 7, off-site storage." Preston said, "That storage was digitized." Maribel looked at him. "Not box 7. Harrison's cane tapped once on the floor. Carol heard it too. Why not? Maribel looked at me. Eleanor objected. I felt my own name rise behind my ribs, though no one had said it. Carol said, "Explain." Maribel took one breath. She filed a written protest. She said the letters were misleading. She said retired workers were being pressured. Harrison said she was insubordinate. Maribel said she was right. Arthur looked like he wanted the ceiling to open. Preston leaned toward his father. Don't. Harrison turned on him. Don't what? Preston kept his voice low. Not here. Carol said, no whispering. Harrison ignored her. You called me. Preston's eyes cut to mine. Because she's trying to open a file she doesn't understand. And whose fault is that? Harrison said. Preston froze. That was the first crack between father and son. Not justice, not conscience, just blame looking for the nearest body. Arthur said, we need to keep this orderly. I said, then order the next document. Carol nodded. Jonah from IT. Arthur's phone still sat on speaker. Carol tapped the screen. Jonah, are you there? A rustle came through. Yes, ma'am, I have more. Preston closed his eyes. Carol said, go ahead. Jonah said, preliminary access review. March 18th reversal under Ellen Price came from Executive Suite Terminal 3. Login occurred at 9:41 p.m. Ellen whispered, I was home. Jonah continued. Badge access to Executive Suite at 9:38 p.m. was Dr. Preston Vale. Preston said, I was in my office. Carol said, let him finish. Jonah cleared his throat. Terminal 3 is not in Dr. Vale's office. It's in the conference alcove. Grace asked, who uses that? Jonah said, mostly admin, sometimes board prep. I wrote 9:41 p.m. Carol asked, any remote access? Yes. A second session opened from Vale Management's device at 9:46. Harrison looked at Preston. Preston said, that device was used by staff. Jonah said, device certificate assigned to Preston Vale. Preston slapped the table. Certificates don't prove hands. Nobody flinched except Ellen. Harrison said, stop talking. Preston turned to him. I can handle this. No, Harrison said. You clearly can't. That was not a father protecting a son. That was a founder protecting a portrait. Carol said, Jonah, preserve full logs. Already exporting. Send to me an outside counsel. Arthur lifted his head. Outside counsel? Carol said, yes. Harrison laughed softly. You always did like theater. Carol closed the laptop halfway. I like records. Dr. Shaw said, and patience. That surprised me. Dr. Shaw had been careful all morning. Careful people often wait for the cost to be visible, then they choose. Harrison looked at him. Your ethics? Yes. Then be ethical. Don't let a hospital fall because a nurse's granddaughter wants a throne. I stood then, not fast, not sharp, just up. My chair made no sound because I held it with one hand. My navy skirt fell straight. My braids were pinned neat. My mother used to say, baby, make them see the person before they invent the servant. That morning, they had invented anyway. That was their sin, not my failure. I looked at Harrison Vale. I don't want a throne, I said. I want the books open. He tapped his cane again. And after that? The patients paid. And after that? The workers named. And after that? I looked at Preston. The people who used charity money for private rescue removed from the door. Preston's face tightened. Harrison's did not. Old pride has practice. He said, you think that file makes you powerful? I think you're afraid it might. That one got him. His fingers closed around the cane handle. Arthur said, Lena, sit down. I turned to him. No. He blinked. I'll stand while a non-voting observer talks about my grandmother. Carol did not tell me to sit. Maribel did not either. Harrison leaned back. Eleanor was offered advancement. Maribel's eyes sharpened. I said, "Say the position." He smiled. "Assistant nursing supervisor." Maribel said, "No." Everyone turned. She walked to the table, opened her binder, and pulled out one photocopy. She applied for night nursing supervisor. Harrison said, "That position required polish." There it was again, not a word on paper, still a lock. I said, "Polish." He looked at me. "Yes." I touched the edge of the table. "You mean white." The room went quiet. Harrison's jaw worked once. Preston looked down. Arthur stared at the photocopy. Nobody corrected me. That was a kind of answer. Maribel's voice was thin but steady. The note in her personnel file says, quote, "Not front-facing leadership material." Ellen Price covered her mouth. Grace lowered the blue folder to the table. I did not cry. My grandmother had done enough crying in private for rooms like this. I was not giving Harrison Vale the comfort of seeing mine. Carol asked, "Who signed the note?" Maribel looked at the page. Harrison Vale. Preston said, "That's a personnel matter from decades ago." I said, "It's a pattern with a signature." Harrison stood. He did need the cane then. Only for a second. "You are standing in a hospital my family built." "No," I said. "I'm standing in a hospital your family branded." His face changed, and I saw the man Preston had been trying to become. Arthur stepped between us with both palms out. "Enough. Noon is approaching." Carol looked at the wall clock. 10:48. Nadine said from the door, "2 board members are downstairs." Arthur turned. "Who?" "Mrs. Lang and Mr. Soto." Harrison frowned. "Who called Raymond Soto?" Carol said, "I did. He's been hostile to this institution for years. He's a voting board member. He wanted the charity clinic spun off. Grace said he wanted it funded separately." Harrison looked at her again. "You talk a great deal." Grace did not shrink this time. "I'm learning from Ms. Carver." That was not a victory speech. It was a small door opening. I took it as it was. Carol gathered the documents into 3 neat stacks. "We're moving into emergency session at noon. Until then, no one contacts witnesses. No one enters records. No one touches the preserved file." Harrison said, "I want to see the file before session." "No." He looked at Arthur. "Tell her." Arthur did not answer quickly enough. Harrison's voice lowered. "Arthur." Arthur swallowed. "Carol is right." Preston turned his head slowly toward him. Arthur kept going, and each word looked heavy. "If we open it in session." Harrison stared at him. "You forget who put you in that chair." Arthur said nothing. I thought of those buyback checks, $200, $500, sometimes less. I thought of Eleanor Carver getting off night shift and stopping by somebody's kitchen table before sleeping. I thought of hands signing away what they were told had no value. I thought of my grandmother saying, "Value is what they hide from you, Lena. Price is what they offer when they hope you're tired." Carol said, "Arthur, secure the room." He nodded to Nadine. Nadine stepped in. "Everyone staying for session needs to remain on this floor." Preston snapped, "You don't have authority to confine anyone." "No," she said. "I have authority over access to the board suite." Harrison gave her a cold look. "And who gave you that?" Nadine pointed to Arthur. "He did, last year, after the medication theft review." Dennis made a small sound, not a laugh, close. Harrison sat again. Preston leaned toward him and whispered, "We need Blair." Carol looked up. "Who is Blair?" No answer. I repeated it. "Who is Blair?" Arthur closed his eyes. Maribel answered, "Blair Conway, Former foundation treasurer. Grace's shoulders stiffened. He approved charity disbursements. Carol said, "Where is he now?" Preston said, "Retired." Maribel said, "Consulting." "For whom?" I asked. Silence. I looked at the payroll support memo. Preston Vale Management, LLC, $420,000, temporary float. I looked at the North Star invoice, $268,900. I looked at the pharmacy reversal, 9:41 p.m., Terminal 3, device assigned to Preston's company. Then I said, "Vale Management?" Preston did not answer. Harrison did. That company kept this hospital alive. I turned to him. With charity funds? With flexibility. There was the words cousin, flexible, float, scraps, cleaning lady. They all came from the same drawer. Carol said, "Did Blair Conway move restricted clinic funds?" Harrison leaned back. "Ask Blair." Carol looked at Arthur. "Call him." Arthur hesitated. I said, "Speaker." Arthur glanced at me. This time he did not argue. He dialed from his contact list. That told me Blair was not as retired as Preston wanted him to sound. The phone rang 4 times. A man answered with wind in the background. "Arthur?" Carol spoke first. "Mr. Conway, this is Carol Vance. You're on speaker in the Mercy Vale boardroom." The wind stopped. A door closed somewhere. Blair said, "I'm not available." Carol said, "You're being asked about restricted charity funds moved to Preston Vale Management, LLC." Preston stood. "End the call." Carol held up one hand. Blair said, "I don't know what you're referring to." I said, $420,000. Silence. Then Blair said, "Who is that?" I answered, "Lena Carver." Another silence, not empty, full. Blair said, "Eleanor's Lena?" Harrison said, "Don't answer her." Carol said, "Dr. Vale, sit down." Blair breathed into the phone. "Is the file open?" I felt every person in the room turn toward that phone. Carol asked, "Why would that matter?" Blair did not answer. I stepped closer to the table. "Mr. Conway, did my grandmother's file include a trigger tied to restricted funds?" Preston said, "She's fishing." Blair said, "I told them not to use that account." Harrison's hand tightened on the cane. Carol said, "Told whom?" Blair said, "I'm not saying more without counsel." Arthur said, "Blair." "No," Blair said. "You all had years to fix this." The line clicked. Nobody spoke. There it was. Not the whole truth. Enough to change the air. Carol looked at Preston. "That was not helpful to you." Preston laughed, but it broke in the middle. A retired man panics on speaker. And now what? I said, "Now noon matters." Harrison looked at me with pure dislike. "You think you've won?" "No." I looked at the chair at the head of the table. Arthur's chair. The chair Preston kept standing behind. The chair my grandmother had never been invited to approach. "I think you're running out of rooms." At 11:22, the elevators opened again. Mrs. Lang came first, short and straight-backed, with a pearl brooch and a legal pad tucked under one arm. Raymond Soto came behind her in a gray suit that looked worn at the cuffs but brushed clean. Dr. Paula Kim from Pediatrics arrived next, still in her white coat, with a pager clipped to her pocket. They stopped when they saw Harrison Vale seated beside Preston. Mrs. Lang said, "So it's true." Harrison rose halfway. "Sylvia." "Don't Sylvia me." She looked at Carol. "Is there a preserved file?" Carol said, "Yes." "Intact?" "Yes." Raymond Soto looked at me. His eyes went to my folder, then to my face. He did not do the little inventory Harrison had done. He offered his hand. "Ms. Carver," he said. I shook it. "Mr. Soto." Preston watched our hands meet. I saw him remember the first morning. Good. Let memory do some work. Dr. Kim said, I was told this concerns charity funds. Grace stepped forward. Yes. Patient impact? 72 delayed vouchers, 114 medication reversals under review, $12 copay collected in error from Mrs. Alvarez. Dr. Kim's face changed. Mrs. Alvarez is mine. Grace nodded. I know. Preston said, Paula, this is being politicized. Dr. Kim looked at him. Did she pay it? He did not answer. Dr. Kim turned to Grace. Did she? Grace said, yes. Doctor. Kim set her pager on the table. Then I'm listening. Arthur called roll as more members came in, 2 by 2, then one alone, coats over arms, coffee in hand, faces set for a fight they did not fully understand yet. Some looked at me with curiosity, some with discomfort. One older trustee glanced at Nadine before he looked at me, as if trying to place which kind of staff I belonged to. I let him have that little shame by himself. Maribel stood near the door with the key ring in her hand. At 11:56, Carol placed a fresh evidence log on the table. Arthur sat at the head, but not comfortably. Preston stood behind Harrison now. Harrison's cane rested across his knees. The preserved file was still locked in Maribel's office, but it felt present in the room. Carol said, before session begins, we need one procedural issue. Arthur looked wary. What issue? Chair succession materials. Harrison's head lifted. Preston said, no. Carol did not look at him. If the sealed file contains a controlling interest, bylaws require immediate recognition of the designated chair. Mrs. Lang said, that's correct. Arthur said, only if valid. Carol nodded. Only if valid. Raymond Soto asked, were materials prepared? Maribel's hand tightened on the keys. Arthur did not answer. Carol said, were they? Maribel looked at me once, then she looked at Arthur. Yes, she said. The word was small. It still reached every corner. Preston's face went blank. Harrison's cane slid an inch against his knees. Mrs. Lang said, where are they? Maribel's voice held. In records, with the file. Preston said, that plaque was never authorized. Carol turned to him. You know about the plaque? His mouth closed. There it was, another door he had opened himself. I stood beside my chair with my folder pressed flat under one hand. My grandmother's brass badge sat in my purse, heavy as a promise. The EC pen was beside it. Outside the boardroom windows, Hawthorne Mill Road carried lunchtime traffic past Mercy Vale like any ordinary Wednesday. Inside, every ordinary excuse had started losing its cover. Arthur looked at the clock. Noon arrived without ceremony. Carol said, open the emergency session. Arthur reached for the gavel with a hand that did not want to be seen shaking. Maribel turned toward the door, and Preston Vale, the man who had refused my hand in front of 18 doctors, looked at me for the first time like he understood the front entrance had never belonged to him alone. Arthur struck the gavel once. The sound was small for what it started. This emergency session of the Mercy Vale Hospital Board is open, he said. Carol stood beside him with the evidence log. The first item is preservation and review of the sealed ownership file. Preston said, before that, I object. Arthur looked at him. On what ground? Conflict. Ms. Carver has misled this board from the beginning. I kept my hands still on my folder. Carol said, how? Preston pointed at me. She entered under audit authority, not ownership. I said, both can be true. Mrs. Lang wrote that down. Harrison leaned forward. You concealed material interest. No, I said. I signed my name. Preston's mouth hardened. You let people think you were staff. I looked at him. You did that. A few eyes moved away from him then, not enough to call courage, enough to call record. Arthur cleared his throat. Dr. Vale, Sit. I'm still chief. For now, Raymond Soto said. That landed clean. Preston turned on him. You've wanted my family gone for 10 years. Raymond did not raise his voice. I wanted a clinic budget that matched the clinic. Dr. Kim said, Can we open the file? Carol looked at Arthur. We need Maribel. Arthur nodded. Maribel stepped out with Nadine, and the room held itself tight while they crossed the hall. I did not follow. I knew that gray cabinet. I had seen it behind Maribel's desk, plain as a storage locker, with nothing on it but a small magnet from Toledo and a paper calendar turned to the wrong month. Plain things hide well in plain offices. Preston watched the door. Harrison watched me. I knew his look by then. It was not only hatred, it was calculation getting older by the minute. You're enjoying this, he said. No, sir. You expect us to believe that? I expect you to hear the file. He smiled with no warmth. Eleanor taught you the theater. My thumb found the ridge of the EC pen through my purse. I did not take it out yet. My grandmother taught me night shift, I said. Theater has better chairs. Dennis lowered his eyes. Grace almost smiled, then stopped. She knew where she was. Arthur said, Enough personal remarks. Harrison looked at him. You learned that tone from me. Arthur's face flushed. And I'm trying to unlearn it. Preston stared at him. Arthur. No, Arthur said. Not now. There it was again, the house cracking from the inside. The door opened. Maribel came in first. Nadine followed with a flat gray metal lockbox in both hands. It was not large, maybe 18 inches long, the kind of box a church might use for offering envelopes before Sunday school. Only this one had 2 seals across the front and a typed label browned at the edges, Mercy Vale Foundation Ownership File. Carol stepped forward. Place it on the table. Nadine set it down. The metal made a hard sound against the polished wood. Preston's eyes went to the seal. Harrison's cane stopped moving. Mrs. Lang said, Are the seals intact? Maribel leaned close. Yes, both. Carol said, Read the label into the record. Maribel put on reading glasses with one hand. The other stayed on the box. Mercy Vale Foundation Ownership File, she read. Eleanor Carver Acquisition Ledger, Employee Repurchase Objections, Chair Succession Materials, and Conditional Control Instrument. A murmur moved through the board. Preston said, Conditional control is not ownership. Carol said, Let her finish. Maribel read the next line. Custodian access restricted until written trigger or board challenge. Dr. Kim asked, What trigger? Maribel looked at me once. I did not nod. I did not need to. She read, Trigger condition includes documented use of restricted charity funds for private management rescue, payroll float, debt service, or executive vendor obligation. Raymond Soto leaned back. That's very specific. It had to be, I said. Preston snapped. You drafted that? No. Then stop answering like counsel. Carol said, she can answer about her knowledge. Harrison said, Eleanor could barely keep up with policy memos. I turned toward him, slow. He wanted the room to laugh. It did not. My grandmother worked 12-hour nights, I said. Then she read your memos at her kitchen table. Harrison's jaw set. I continued because the room needed the whole shape. She kept a yellow lamp on until 3 a.m. She made coffee in a dented percolator. She underlined words she didn't trust. Maribel's eyes shone, but her voice stayed ready. I said, she didn't need your permission to understand theft. Preston said, Careful. I looked at him. I'm reading the line. That shut him up for one full breath. Carol held out a small blade. Maribel, open the seals. Arthur said, Wait. Everyone turned. He looked sick, but he did not look away. Before we open it, I need to enter one disclosure. Preston said, "No." Arthur swallowed. I received a memo from Blair Conway in 2017. Harrison's head turned sharply. Carol said, "Do you have it?" Arthur opened a leather folder and pulled out 2 pages. His fingers were not steady. It warned that restricted charity money was being used as temporary cash support, he said. Doctor. Kim stared at him. "You knew?" "I was told it was corrected." Raymond said, "By whom?" Arthur looked at Preston. Preston said, "Don't put that on me." Arthur's voice went flat. "By you." Mrs. Lang put her pen down. "How much?" Arthur checked the page as if he did not know the number by heart. He did. $186,000 in 2017, he said. $94,000 in 2018, then cleared. Carol took the memo. "And now $420,000. Grace said, "Plus the North Star invoice." Dr. Kim asked, "What invoice?" Grace opened the blue folder. $268,900, labeled Equipment Integration. No matching equipment received. Preston said, "That's not before the board." Carol said, "It is now." Harrison spoke low. "Arthur, you fool." Arthur flinched at fool. I saw the boy still living in that grown man's suit. He said, "I should have acted then." Mrs. Lang said, "Yes." No one softened it. Good. Carol looked to Maribel. "Proceed." Maribel cut the first seal, then the second. The old adhesive gave with a dry little pull. She lifted the lid. Inside were 3 bundled files, a small ledger book, and a brass plate wrapped in thin brown paper. Preston looked at the wrapped object and went still. Carol noticed. "What is that?" Maribel touched the paper but did not open it. "Chair succession plaque." Harrison said, "It's ceremonial." "Mrs." Lang said, "It's bylaw evidence." Carol said, "First the instrument." Maribel selected the top folder. The tab had my grandmother's name in neat black ink. Eleanor Carver. Seeing it there, in that room, almost took my knees from me. Almost. I stood. Maribel opened the folder. "There are acquisition records." Carol said, "Summarize." "Employee shares purchased from 1969 through 2000, Maribel said. Distressed shares, widow transfers, retiree repurchases, canceled buyback reversals, and foundation conversion credits." Raymond said, "Total?" Maribel turned pages. 39% direct. Preston gave a sharp laugh. "Then we're done." Maribel kept reading. Plus 12% held in conditional trust, assigned upon trigger to Eleanor Carver's named beneficiary. Mrs. Lang leaned forward. "That totals 51. The air changed again. Not loud. Worse for Preston, it was exact. Carol said, "Do not conclude yet. Read the beneficiary page." Maribel turned another page. Preston stepped forward. "I object to any reading before authentication." Carol said, "Sit down. I'm chief of this hospital. You are a subject of the review." His face darkened. "You don't have the authority." Mrs. Lang said, "She does, and so do we." Harrison pushed himself up. "This is a family institution." Raymond said, "Then your family should have kept clean books." Harrison looked ready to strike the table with his cane, but Preston grabbed his arm. That told me fear had passed pride. Maribel placed her finger on the page. I heard my own breathing. I heard the faint hum of the boardroom lights. I heard someone's pager vibrate and stop. Carol said, "Read it." Maribel's voice shook once, then steadied. "Upon documented trigger, I, Eleanor May Carver, assign all direct and conditional voting control of my Mercy Vale Hospital interest, totaling 51%, to my granddaughter, Lena Carver, legal name Lena Marie Carver, with immediate recognition as controlling owner and chair under Article 4 of the bylaws. Nobody moved. Then Dr. Kim whispered, "My God." I did not cry. I thought of my grandmother's hands, thick from work, folding my church socks when I was little. I thought of her telling me to hold my pen right. I thought of her walking into Mercy Vale through the employee entrance for 31 years while men signed papers over her head. Preston stared at me. For once, he had no room to stand in. Carol said, "Enter the instrument into the record." Mrs. Lang said, "So entered." Arthur's lips parted, but nothing came out. Harrison sank back into his chair. The cane slipped against the table leg. Preston said, "That document is stale." Carol said, "It includes a 2002 reaffirmation." Maribel turned the page. Signed before a notary. Preston said, "She was ill by then." "No," I said. He looked at me. "She was tired," I said. "There's a difference." Carol said, "Maribel, read the chair succession entry." Maribel opened the second bundle. Preston held up both hands. His voice changed. It softened in a way that made my skin go still. "Lena." That was the first time he said my name like it belonged to me. I looked at him. He took one step around Harrison's chair. We got off wrong. No one helped him. He came closer, not close enough to touch. "This hospital is complicated," he said. "You know that now." I knew it Monday. His mouth trembled at the edge. "Then help me protect it." I said nothing. He extended his hand. That hand had hung beside his white coat in the main conference room while mine waited in the air. That hand had pointed toward the service hallway. That hand had signed off on flexible funds and watched a $12 copay taken from Mrs. Alvarez. Now it waited for me. The room watched too. Every doctor who had laughed on Monday was not there, but enough of their silence had come with the board. Dennis at the wall, Dr. Shaw near Grace, Arthur at the head of the table, Preston's father in his chair, Maribel with the file open, Carol with the record. Preston said, "We can work together." I looked at his hand, then at his face. "People like me enter through the front, doctor," I said, "especially when our name is on the building." His hand stayed in the air. I did not take it. Maribel unwrapped the brown paper. The brass plate caught the boardroom light. It had been polished before it was hidden. Not new. Waiting. Carol lifted it enough for the table to see. Chairwoman Lena Carver Arthur closed his eyes. "Mrs. Lang said, the bylaws require immediate recognition." Raymond said, "Move to recognize Lena Carver as controlling owner and chair." Dr. Kim said, "Second." Preston dropped his hand. Harrison said, "This is theft." I turned to him. "No, sir, this is receipt." Carol said, "All in favor?" Hands rose around the table. Mrs. Lang, Raymond Soto, Dr. Kim. Grace, as non-voting, did not raise hers, but she stood straighter. Two trustees who had not spoken lifted their hands after looking at the file, not at Harrison. Arthur raised his last. Preston stared at him. Arthur whispered, "Aye." Carol counted. Motion carries. The gavel sat by Arthur's hand. He looked at it, then looked at me. I walked to the head of the table. No rush, no performance. Arthur stood and moved aside. That chair was warm when I touched the back. I did not sit yet. Carol said, "Madam Chair, there are pending emergency actions." "Madam Chair," the words entered the room and found the old insult waiting there. Cleaning lady. That was what he had called me when my hand was still in the air. Cleaning lady. My grandmother used to clean a patient's face after fever broke. She cleaned bed rails, coffee cups, old wounds, and lies on forms. Men like Preston made cleaning sound low because they depended on it, and feared the people who noticed what dirt remained. I rested my folder on the table. First action, I said. My voice sounded like mine. That mattered. Freeze Preston Vale Management LLC's contract, effective now. Preston said, "You can't." Carol said, "She can call the vote." Mrs. Lang said, "So moved." Raymond said, "Second." I said, "All in favor." This time I watched each hand. Arthur's came up faster. Motion carried. Preston's face had gone pale under the boardroom lights. Second action, I said. Refer the restricted charity fund line to state regulators and outside counsel. Harrison said, "You'll ruin the hospital." Dr. Kim said, "The patients were already paying." I looked at Grace. Read the patient impact. Grace opened the folder with both hands. 72 delayed vouchers, 114 medication reversals under review, $12 improper copay from Mrs. Alvarez, 38 transportation vouchers withheld, 9 pediatric inhaler subsidies delayed, 21 oncology nutrition cards paused. Dr. Kim's hand covered her pager. Grace continued. Total restricted fund exposure under review is $691,300, including $420,000 tied to Vale Management. Raymond said, "That money goes back." I nodded. Third action, redirect the first recovered $420,000 to the Charity Clinic Reserve. Mrs. Lang said, "So moved." Dr. Kim said, "Second." Preston said, "You're making emotional decisions." I looked at him. "No, I'm reading amounts." Carol said, "All in favor." The hands rose, motion carried. Harrison laughed once. It had no strength. "You think numbers make you righteous?" "No," I said, "but they make you visible." He looked at me for a long second. Then he said the thing he should have kept buried. Eleanor was never meant to sit at this table. The room went quiet. There, the whole house, said Plain. I walked to my purse and took out the brass EC pen. Then I took out the old name badge. Eleanor Carver, RN. I placed both beside the ownership file. She knew, I said. Maribel covered her mouth, then lowered her hand. I picked up the pen. She carried this on night shift. She used it to correct charge slips when patients were billed twice. She used it to write names of workers who sold shares because you told them they were worthless. Harrison's eyes stayed on the badge. I said, "She didn't sit here then. She sent me." Preston turned away from the table. "This is absurd." Carol said, "Doctor, Vale, remain available." He looked back. "Am I being removed?" I sat in the chair then. "Yes," I said, "pending review." Arthur's breath left him hard. Preston looked at the board. "You'll let her do this?" Mrs. Lang said, "We just voted." Dr. Kim said, "You're relieved of chief duties." Raymond added, "Security access should be suspended." Nadine stepped closer to the door. Preston saw her and gave a bitter smile. "Of course." I said, "Nadine." "Yes, Madam Chair." "Collect his executive badge." Preston's head lifted. There it was. The first morning, he had taken mine with 2 fingers like it had dirt on it. Now Nadine held out her hand. Preston did not move. Harrison said, "Don't." Preston looked at his father. For 1 second, he looked young and trapped and angry that the room would not become a hallway for him. Then he pulled the badge from his coat pocket and slapped it into Nadine's palm. Nadine did not flinch. "Thank you." I said, "Also his access to charity accounts." Jonah's voice came from Arthur's phone. He had stayed on the line so quietly I had almost forgotten him. "I can suspend account permissions now," he said. Carol said, "Do it." Jonah said, "Done." Preston stared at the phone. You kept listening? I said, you taught us access matters. Dennis made that almost laugh again. Preston turned to me. You have no idea what you've inherited. I looked around the boardroom. At the old wood, the glass walls, the file, the badge, the doctors who had chosen late, and the ones who still looked unsure because power had changed faster than their manners. I inherited patience, I said. Workers, too. Harrison pushed himself up. And a debt load. Then we'll read that line next. He stopped. Carol lifted another folder. There's also the matter of the prior complaint. Preston said, what complaint? Maribel answered before Carol could. Eleanor's complaint. I looked at her. Maribel touched the bottom bundle. It was filed with the ownership materials. Carol opened it. This concerns the repurchase campaign? Yes, Maribel said, and racial discrimination in promotion. Harrison said, old grievances. Doctor. Kim looked at him. Old harm. I did not need to make my face hard. It already knew what to do. Carol read only the first page. Eleanor Carver alleged that black nurses were steered away from supervisory postings and offered informal duties without title or pay. Mrs. Lang asked, were names included? Maribel said, yes. Arthur rubbed his forehead. How many? Maribel looked at me. 12. 12, not one grandmother. 12 women who had carried keys without authority, trained new nurses without title, calmed families without credit, and watched promotions pass over their heads. Raymond said, that gets reviewed too. I nodded. By outside counsel, not this board alone. Harrison said, you'll dig until nothing stands. I looked at him. No, we'll dig until the floor is honest. Preston reached for the back of Harrison's chair. We should leave. Carol said, Dr. Vale, one more item. He stopped. She held up the evidence log. You're directed not to destroy, alter, or remove records. Preston laughed under his breath. I know how legal holds work. I said, then obey one. His eyes met mine. For the first time, he did not answer. Nadine opened the boardroom door. The hallway beyond was full of the regular hospital sounds. A cart rolling, a phone ringing, a child crying once, then being comforted. Mercy Vale had not stopped because Preston Vale had. That mattered too. Harrison stood slowly. Preston offered his arm. Harrison took it, then pulled away as if he resented needing it. At the door, Harrison turned back. This hospital has my name. I looked at the plaque lying beside the file. And my grandmother's labor, I said. He left with nothing better. Preston stayed 1 second longer. His eyes went to my hand, the one he had refused. He did not reach again. Good. After the door closed, nobody spoke right away. Arthur stood beside me, no chair now. His tie had gone crooked. Lena, he said, Madam Chair in session. His face tightened, but he nodded. Madam Chair, I'm sorry. That was the apology scene the room had been waiting to see. I gave it only the space it deserved. For what part? I asked. He looked down at the file. For knowing enough. I let that sit. Then I said, put it in writing. He swallowed. I will. And include the 2017 memo. Yes. Carol said, we need interim leadership. Dr. Kim said, clinical operations can report through Medical Executive Committee for 72 hours. I looked at her. Can patients still get vouchers today? Grace answered. If finance releases them. I turned to Arthur. He nodded quickly. Yes. Say the amount. He blinked. I said, for the record. Arthur picked up a finance sheet. Immediate release of $125,000 to cover delayed charity vouchers and pharmacy assistance. Grace said, "That clears the current holds." "Do it," I said. Arthur typed on his laptop. His hands moved like a man signing his own confession. Carol said, "Confirmation?" Arthur turned the screen toward her. "Released." Grace looked at me. "Mrs. Alvarez?" "Refund today," I said, with a written apology. Dr. Kim said, "I'll call her myself." "No," I said. "Finance took it. Finance returns it. You can tell her care continues." Dr. Kim nodded. "Fair." Maribel gathered the ownership file, but I placed one hand on the brass badge. "Leave this out," I said. Maribel looked at it. "Of course." Her voice was soft. Outside the boardroom, through the glass, I saw two nurses pause near the elevator. One recognized me from the charity wing. She looked at the chair, then at me, then at Preston's absence. She did not wave. She just stood taller before she moved on. That was enough for noon. Carol leaned close. "You have about 6 urgent signatures. Bring them." She smiled a little. "You're very calm." I picked up the EC pen. My grandmother would fuss if I wasn't. The first document froze Vale Management. The second authorized outside counsel. The third preserved records. The fourth released charity funds. The fifth suspended Preston's access. The sixth placed a temporary hold on North Star payments. I signed each one with Eleanor's pen. The ink was dark blue, not black. I remembered that suddenly from her kitchen table. She said blue made originals easier to spot. When I finished, I capped the pen and placed it beside her badge. Raymond Soto stood. "Madam Chair, I'd like to inspect the clinic ledger with you this afternoon." 2 o'clock, I said. Lang said, "I'll stay for governance." Good. Dr. Kim picked up her pager. "I need to get back upstairs." I looked at her. "Thank you for asking about Mrs. Alvarez first." She nodded once. That should have been the easy part. "Yes," I said. "It should have." Grace came to the head of the table after the others began moving. She held the blue folder against her chest. "I should have spoken sooner," she said. "You spoke when it cost something." "That doesn't erase Monday." "No." She accepted that. "What do you need from me?" "The patient list, every delayed voucher, every reversed medication. No summaries first." She nodded. Line by line. Line by line. Maribel waited until Grace left. Then she lifted the brass plaque with both hands. "Do you want it installed now?" I looked at the empty strip beside the boardroom door. Arthur's temporary nameplate was still there. "No," I said. "Not there." Maribel's brow creased. I picked up Eleanor's badge. It was heavier than it looked. "First, we go to the main conference room." Her eyes understood. That room had held 18 doctors and one insult. It could hold a correction. Nadine walked with us. Carol, too. Dennis trailed behind without being asked. Arthur stayed in the boardroom, writing what he should have written years ago. The hall to the main conference room ran past the same polished glass Preston loved. People looked up as we passed. Some saw the plaque. Some saw the badge in my hand. Some saw only a young black woman in a navy suit walking where she had been told not to enter. That was fine. Seeing takes practice. The main conference room door was open. A few doctors sat inside with lunch trays and charts. Not 18 this time. 6. Enough. Dr. Shaw was there. So was the older trustee who had looked at Nadine before me. He stood when Carol entered, then stayed standing when he saw me. Maribel removed the temporary chief notice from the wall beside the screen. Nadine handed her a small screwdriver from the facility's drawer. Preston's lectern still stood at the front. I walked to it. Nobody laughed. Dr. Shaw stood. "Ms. Carver." I looked at him. He corrected himself. Madam Chair. Maribel fixed the brass plate beneath the existing Mercy Vale Hospital sign. The screws turned with small, clean sounds. Chairwoman Lena Carver. When she finished, I placed Eleanor's brass badge below it, not nailed, not hidden, just resting on the narrow ledge of the frame. Nadine said, "It'll fall if the door slams." I know. I opened my purse and took out a strip of clear tape from the little packet my mother always told me to carry. Churchwomen carried tape, mints, tissues, and a pen. Between them, half the world stayed together. I taped the badge under the plaque. Dr. Shaw watched me. That was hers? Yes. The night nurse? The shareholder, I said. His face lowered. Yes. I stepped back. The badge sat under my name. Eleanor Carver, RN. Not decorative, not forgotten, not service door. Carol asked, "Do you want a statement?" I looked at the doctors, the staff at the doorway, the plaque, the badge, the room where my hand had once hung alone. "No speech," I said. Then I touched the badge once. "I did not take the hospital from him," I said. I stopped letting him hide inside it. The room did not clap. I was grateful for that. Clapping would have made it feel clean too soon. Dr. Shaw set his lunch tray down and walked to the front. He looked at the badge, then at me. "I was in here Monday," he said. "Yes." I didn't laugh. No. I didn't help either. That was better than a sermon. I nodded once. Carol's phone buzzed. She read the screen and looked toward the hallway. Preston's at administration. Nadine's jaw moved once. With Harrison? No. Alone. I looked at the plaque again. Then we go. We walked back through the glass corridor. The hospital had already begun to adjust around the change. Not in grand ways, in small ones. A clerk who had looked through me on Monday now held the elevator. A nurse from pediatrics whispered my name to another nurse. A young orderly stepped out of our path, then seemed ashamed of stepping too far and stepped back where he belonged. At administration, Preston stood beside Maribel's desk. The locked gray cabinet was open behind her. Empty now, except for the dust outline where my file had waited. Preston's white coat was gone. He had rolled his sleeves up. That made him look less like a chief and more like a man who had packed in a hurry. He saw me and raised both hands, palms out. "Lena. Madam Chair." His mouth tightened. "Madam Chair. Please." There it was. Not loud, not noble, not even clean. Please. Maribel stood beside the cabinet with her keys in her fist. She did not move away from it. Preston took one step toward me. Nadine took one step, too. He stopped. "I need 10 minutes, he said. "For what?" "To explain the North Star payments." Carol lifted her tablet. "Those are frozen." "I know that." "Then explain to outside counsel." He looked past her, straight at me. "If this goes to the state today, payroll collapses Friday." Arthur came out of the boardroom with a printed letter in his hand. He heard that and stopped. Carol said, "You told the board payroll was secured." Preston did not look at her. "It was secured if the bridge cleared." "What bridge?" I asked. His eyes flicked to Maribel's cabinet. That was enough. Maribel said, "No." Preston swallowed. "There's a donor pledge." "No," Maribel said again. "There's a restricted pediatric endowment." Arthur's face went slack. I said, "Amount." Maribel opened a folder from her desk. She had already pulled it. That woman had been waiting for truth so long she kept it within arm's reach. $286,000, she said, held for pediatric respiratory care. Dr. Kim had come up behind us without my noticing. She still had her pager in one hand. She said, "That pays for inhalers." Preston rubbed his forehead. "Only for 48 hours. I looked at him. You were going to borrow from children who can't breathe. His face hardened, then broke back into fear. Borrow, not take. Grace stepped out of the charity office. She had a stack of patient forms against her chest. You already used their pharmacy line, she said. Preston looked at her. Grace. No, she said. Don't soften my name now. The hallway had gone still, not silent. Hospitals never get silent. But people had stopped pretending not to listen. Preston lowered his voice. I'm asking you to hold the referral until I can unwind it. I thought of Monday, his fingers on my visitor badge, his eyes moving over my navy suit, my deep brown skin, my pinned braids, and deciding I was easier to name than to know. Cleaning lady. He had needed me small. Now he needed me useful. I said, You don't get the weekend. Lena, please. Nadine's face did not change, but her hand rested near the badge clipped to her belt. Preston said, My father can't survive this. Harrison had used that hospital like a surname could be a deed. Preston had used charity like a drawer. I said, Mrs. Alvarez survived $12 being taken from her medicine. His eyes shut. Doctor. Kim said, 9 children are waiting on inhaler approvals. Grace added, 21 oncology nutrition cards too. Carol said, and 72 vouchers. Preston looked at all of them, then back at me. I'll resign, he said, quietly. No, I'll sign anything. You will. Then what do you want? I reached for the folder Maribel held and opened it on her desk. A written acknowledgement of every restricted line touched by Vale management. His lips parted. Carol said, Here, now. Arthur stepped forward and put his printed letter beside the folder. And mine. I glanced down. It was addressed to the board. His signature sat at the bottom. The 2017 memo was attached behind it. Preston saw it. Arthur. Arthur did not look away. I helped bury it. Harrison's voice came from the elevator. You weak fool. He stood there with one hand on the rail, breathing hard from the walk. Nobody moved to help him. Nadine said, Sir, this is an administrative area. Harrison ignored her. His eyes went to the cabinet, then to the folder, then to me. You got your chair, he said. Now you want blood too? Records, I said. He gave me that old cold look. You people always want more once someone opens a door. There it was, plain enough for the hallway to hear. Dr. Kim stepped closer to Grace. Maribel's keys stopped shaking. Arthur's head dropped. Preston looked at his father like even he wished the words could be pulled back. I did not raise my voice. The door was already mine. Harrison stared at me. Carol said, That statement goes in the incident record. Harrison laughed. Of course it does. I turned to Nadine. Escort Mr. Vale to the lobby. Harrison's mouth opened. Nadine said, This way. He looked around for someone to object. No one did. The older trustee from the conference room had followed us and now stood near the copier. He folded his arms and looked at the floor. Moral verdicts do not always come as speeches. Sometimes they come as a man finally refusing to rescue another man from his own mouth. Harrison walked past me. His shoulder nearly touched mine, but he moved aside first. Preston watched him go. Then he sat in the chair beside Maribel's desk. I need paper, he said. Maribel handed him a legal pad, not the hospital letterhead. Plain yellow paper. That felt right. He began writing. Carol stood over him. Line names, dollar amounts, dates. He nodded. Grace set her patient stack on the desk. And patient impact. Preston's pen stopped. I said, Keep writing. He wrote, Vale Management Payroll Bridge, $420,000. Northstar Deferred Invoice Cover, $68,500. Charity Pharmacy Reversals, $53,200. Transportation vouchers held. $19,600. Pediatric respiratory endowment attempted draw. $286,000. He pressed so hard the pen tore the paper on the last zero. Carol photographed each page. Maribel stamped them received. Arthur signed his letter and slid it to Carol without being asked twice. Dr. Kim looked at me. Finance is ready for Mrs. Alvarez. Bring it here, I said. A finance clerk named Paul came down with a refund envelope and a printed apology. He was the same man who had told Grace the system would not allow an override. Grace looked at him. It allowed it today? Paul's ears reddened. Yes. Good, I said. Who signs? He held out a pen to me. I did not take it. Finance signs. Paul blinked. Then he signed his own name at the bottom of the apology. His hand was not steady. Now walk it to her, I said. Dr. Kim said, I'll go with him. Grace picked up the voucher stack. I'll bring the approvals. They left together. That was one concrete thing done. Not fixed. Done. Carol's phone rang again. She answered, listened, and put it on speaker. Jonah said, Badge access is updated. Preston Vale is inactive across executive, finance, pharmacy, admin, and board systems. Preston looked at the floor. Jonah added, I also found a permissions group named Flexible Funds. Maribel closed her eyes. Carol said, Disable it. Already done. I said, Who was in it? A pause. Jonah said, Preston Vale, Arthur Bell, finance admin, one shared service account. Arthur said, Remove me. Jonah said, Done. I looked at Carol. No shared accounts after today. Carol typed, Policy order drafted. Preston tore the page from the pad and handed it to her. His hand hovered there, waiting for someone to take what he had finally admitted. Carol took it with 2 fingers. Not cruel. Careful. Preston looked up at me. I'm asking for one thing, he said. No private deal. It's not that. What? My mother's portrait. It's in the chief office. I had passed that portrait twice. A woman in pearls, painted soft, hanging above a locked liquor cabinet, Preston probably called a credenza. Facilities will pack personal family property, I said, with inventory. He gave a short nod. Thank you. That was the only mercy I had for him, and it did not cost a patient $1. Nadine escorted him to the executive office to collect his keys. Carol went with them. Dennis followed at a distance. He still had not said much, but when Preston reached the office door, Dennis was the one who held out the cardboard property box. Preston looked at him. Dennis said, Hospital property stays. Preston put his keys in the box, then his parking pass, then the silver nameplate from his desk. Dr. Preston Vale, Chief Executive Officer. Dennis tilted the box so the nameplate slid flat against the bottom. When they came back, Nadine carried the box. Preston carried nothing. At the lobby, Harrison waited near the glass doors, angry and smaller than he had been upstairs. Outside, Hawthorne Mill Road ran past Mercy Vale like any other afternoon. A delivery truck turned in. 2 volunteers pushed an empty wheelchair toward the entrance. Preston paused by the security desk. He looked at the main doors, then at me. I should have shaken your hand, he said. I said, you should have read my badge. He had no answer for that. Nadine opened the door. Father and son stepped out together. This time, no one held it wide for them after they passed. Back inside, the lobby desk clerk removed a laminated sign from the counter. It read, Vendors and temporary staff use rear entrance. She looked at me. Do you want this kept? I looked at the sign, then at the front doors where patients entered with folders, canes, strollers, worry, and hope. No. She bent it once, hard, and dropped it into the shred bin. Maribel came down with Eleanor's badge in her palm. The tape had not held. The little brass piece had slipped loose from the conference room frame. "I thought you'd want to fix it," she said. I took it from her. Warm from her hand, scratched at the edges, still readable. We went back to the main conference room. Maribel brought 2 small brass screws this time. Nadine held the chair steady while I climbed up. Carol stood below with the folder tucked under one arm. I set the badge under my plaque and pressed it flat. The screwdriver turned twice. Eleanor Carver, RN, held firm beneath my name.